I'm so tempted to fucking air guitar every time this comes on. Dude. I'm
Do it, man.
fucking
Something
nerd,
in you.
dude. I'm trying not to, but just.
I'm no expert in music, and certainly not an air guitar technique. But that looks like some terrible air guitaring to me, if I'm being honest.
Look, we've already determined that I am not a music cell. I don't hear the notes inside of my head.
Meow.
Meow.
I can't even fake it, dude. My brain doesn't know what it's doing. It's just I'm an NPC here. Just snapping little notes out here, but they don't mean anything to me.
Meow.
He meowed balefully.
Drop the meow. It's our inside joke nobody knows about.
Yeah, I changed your picture, your contact to that, and so now it's like I've got an old picture of Logan from my freshman year, whatever Jamie decides to upload, and then yours now is just this white head with and the meow right in the middle of it.
It's so fitting, dude. I love it.
It's a good frame of reference. It sets the stage before you start talking to somebody who doesn't have an internal monologue, you know? Remember, the words have to be said out loud in this conversation.
The auditory NPC. I get to see what it's like being disabled in this sense, you know?
That's true, because we've talked about the ability to create images kind of thing in your head. And you felt like you were pretty strong on that aspect, like you can conjure up an apple in your head pretty easily, or are you similarly disadvantaged? But just not with sounds.
Yeah, not with sounds. And it kind of
you do hear, however, your own voice, just not
my own voice is the only one I can make inside of my head and like actually kind of hear it. Anything else, like I tried. Like I was in the car driving for like 3 hours. I turned the music off and I tried to make music in my head or make noises or anything I could identify, and it was severely lacking. just not there.
Like having arguments between Palpatine and Trump in my head half the time. It's very confusing.
It makes sense. You do great like impressions, man. And being able to imagine the voice in your head probably helps a lot for creating it. Like I'm kind of awful at impressions. I'm bad at music unless I play like, Vivek Ramaswamy, where it's like, I see the notes. I press the note exactly when I'm supposed to, just kind of NPC music playing. But, I like it. We can't all be good at something. And I think me describing every single sound inside of my head, like makes me a better writer. Cause like everything in my head is like super descriptive because like I can't imagine it. So I have to like describe every little bit of it. So
that's a really interesting take. Yeah, because I've certainly gotten to points in writings I've done where I've come to a sound and I want to just sound it out on paper, which is not a good way to convey a sound to somebody.
Not at all.
Especially not with the average American reading level these days. Good luck sounding
which
that
is
out.
Actually abysmal. I heard this crazy stat the other day that it was like 40-something% of adults in Philly have like a 5th grade reading comprehension. Now, granted, it is Philly, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. But still, that's not that. I just think about the books that I read in 5th grade. Not that advanced. What were the ones where the teenagers turn into animals? The Animorphs. Yeah, that's 5th grade reading level.
Those tremendously disturbing cover art. There's like 7 different forms of half humans,
half caterpillar, half.
I wonder. At this point, they were really targeting that teen market. Do you think that as the times changed and as that crowd matured, they just went straight into like furry smut novels?
I feel like Harry Potter really destroyed Animorphs markets, like so totally and completely. But yeah, the smut markets are weird too. I was talking to a friend who was describing a book she was reading, and she said it was 600 pages before the first kiss. And you might think, like, is that really a romance novel? Is it anything? Dude, it was some of the horniest shit I've ever heard described. It's like 10 levels deep, female inception thought palace. All about fucking just, what's he gonna do next? What is he's looking at me? Interesting. What could this possibly mean? Just constant sparks, no fire. And I love it, man. I fucking love it.
It's interesting the shame and the maybe even recorrection we've had in society for males towards pornography. There's like a strong movement now of like why porn's so bad for you and it's brain rot and get away from it. But I think we failed to address female pornography, which is these smut novels. And like we're just letting women walk around on the bus looking at their smut novels. Like if I was to take a Jugs magazine out on public transportation, I'd get crucified for it. But these ladies are just reading this filth right in front of my children.
Absolutely. It's gross. And, you know, I think the real issue is that like all of these women, they have the kind of brain where like everything turns into words. So, you know, you read the smut novel, whereas us, we're men, pictures, you know, we're shape rotators. I see the boobs. I want to imagine like, oh, what do they look like from that side, that side? These women, they're not shape rotators. And so they get to kind of get like a free pass in society just because like we're all reading at a 5th grade level. So, you know, you see the title, it says something about werewolf dick, and half of Philadelphia doesn't actually, they can't comprehend it. And so, you know,
this is that female privilege that never gets addressed right here.
Absolutely.
This is the unfair. These are on equal standings. And we had through centuries and centuries of being henpecked and beat down by women. We have decided that our proclivity to perversion is so much less socially acceptable than their own. I'm going to start 100%. Championing this cause.
100%. I think,
although it is a little bit hard for that kid to see the written porn across the bus seat, maybe a little more than the actual pornography, to be fair.
That's fair. And I guess there's not a long history of like females masturbating in public spaces to this stuff.
That's true. That is mostly a male problem. I'll own that one.
How do we know? How do we know? You know, she could just be like, oh no, I'm using the pole for support, but she's moving just a little bit. Hips are grinding. You don't know, man.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm going to start calling that out. Ma'am, why are you hugging that pole? Let me see that book title right now.
That's totally fair. One is a lot more in your face, right? One's a lot more open than the other, right?
Exactly.
Just like we wouldn't be upset if there's if a guy is doing the same in a very discreet way. It's the open. It's the openness of it.
Be upset.
I mean,
be upset if a guy was grinding up on a pole on a bus that you were on.
It's like the plausible deniability, you know, because he could be all like, "I got the shakes, you know, I haven't had enough vitamin A or whatever."
It's a little easier for the females again when you step away as a guy and you're like, "I just had an itch," and you're 6 inches of raging hard boner right there on the bus.
Huh? Must be nice.
Giving yourself some credit, huh?
Must be nice. Well,
guy, I was going with a universal average. There's no reason to be commenting on me.
Welcome to Against the Law podcast. We're a very serious podcast that talks about very serious stuff. Just to stop this dead in its tracks, the reason we have assembled today is to talk about the Europors and can they not defend themselves? The shifting geopolitical paradigm that we're living in, the changing sands, changing guards, Europe freaking out, all of that good stuff. So yeah, now that we're on topic, let's I'll open it up.
To say, but I guess
I know you did. That's why I shifted.
You can segue over, and that's fine. Yeah, this is an interesting, and you see both sides of this conversation. We're like all the way from like Russia's going all the way to the ocean, and how long before they come to America if we don't stifle this before it starts. And of course, we're seeing some saber rattling now as you sent old Macron's speech as we're getting ready to kick this off, and the demand for more military spending and industrial turnover so that they can begin to create the weapons that they've basically been exclusively buying from Lockheed Martin in America up to this point. And do the Euros actually have, one, the military capability or military readiness at this point in time, because they got to jump in there right now. That's one of my favorite parts is the Macron spending on military, where he's like, look, we doubled our spending, which I love the way we doubled it, but the chart goes to 2030. So it's like, you haven't doubled it yet. And you're also talking about a war tomorrow. So like, how long are we going to be building up this military before we get into it? But that's kind of what we wanted to address today. This is something we've been bouncing around a lot, and just get into like, what do we think about Europe's actual ability to defend themselves if we truly do pull out of this? And is this the 5D chess game that Donald Trump's been playing the whole time, where this is a perfect setup? Just like World War II, we let the Euros mess each other up for a couple years, and then we get to sweep in right at the end and kind of clean everything up economically and sign a whole lot of really nice peace treaties in the United States' favor.
This is a very interesting one because it's kind of funny. I think the worst case scenario for Europe as a whole is if we don't get the peace treaty. Because I know you guys didn't have time to listen to Macron saying it happened like 10 minutes before we went live. But I was just listening to it while I was tossing the suit on, and it was kind of funny. There were a lot of assumptions built into it, a lot of good stuff too. Like he wants to increase their production. They want to become less reliant. They want to be ready for a war with Russia. But one of the assumptions he made was that after the peace treaty gets signed, we want to build up our forces enough so that we can stop Russia if they invade again. And it's a very interesting assumption that they have because on the one hand, like obviously the US is pushing for a peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia. And there's, depending on who you talk to in Europe, some people are kind of supportive of it. Some people think it's going to be a sell-off to to Russia, where Russia gets some territory for free. But still, it's interesting because even Macron's saber rattling, he requires a peace treaty so that he has enough time to increase his forces, build up readiness and whatnot. Like worst case scenario is that they don't get the peace treaty that we're pushing for right now. Even though they seem to be kind of railing against us at the moment, it's still very interesting to look at. And France, compared to some of these other countries, is not the worst one in the bunch. France is actually kind of in a decent place. And I think it'd be interesting for us to kind of like, I know we all did like a little bit of research on different countries. It would be kind of fun to like circle to what I view as the worst one in the bunch. Or actually, they're the second worst in the bunch. But I think it's the one that y'all would have like the most to comment on. And we kind of wanted to like talk about Germany here because the Germans have been the most indecisive. Like if you could think of like just a bipolar arts chick that you're trying to like fuck in college, and she's just one day she's hot, one day she's cold, one day she's here, one day she's not. That's Germany, 100%. And people talk about the US being one election away from flipping on our head, which is what we do like every 4 years, every 8 years. Germany is probably one election away from like, I don't know, going full Nazi. And then the other election, they're away from just being complete pacifists who will just roll over when Russia shows up. So looking at them like, let me talk about them being retarded for a little while longer. If you go back 10 years and look at Germany, they had nuclear plants. They had a kind of fucked up renewable energy grid, and they kind of went full retarded. One party won. They're like, we're tearing down all of the wind turbines. We're going coal. Then Fukushima happened, and they're like, we're decommissioning all of our nuclear plants. We're going even more coal. And then they have all this like Russian gas coming in. So their energy buildup was just like coal, gas, oil. 50% of it was coming from Russia. And then, Russia invades and they're like, what do we do? Yeah, I don't know, Sveinen. Well, what do we do? And they just kind of sat around until their pipeline got blew up by us. And then, they're still importing gas and oil from Russia, but it's decreased. I think they're down to like 10% compared to 50%, which is what they were. But like they've had no like defined plan, no thoughts, no like direction. It's like every 4 years they're blowing something up and doing something new. And it's kind of the same for their like military capabilities as well. Despite having, I think like 170 million people, 180 million people, they have 180 personnel in their armed forces with another 30,000 reserves. I don't know what y'all found, but it's abysmal, completely abysmal. They don't have any local like industry for their munitions. Half of their Leopard tanks apparently are broken down, non-operational. They're having issues with spare parts, and they don't really have any of the factories ready to do this. They're ramping up a 100-year-old factory to make artillery shells again. It's been sitting there mothballed for how long? And it's like, do you not have anything like ready to go right now? And it's interesting to hear them, being the most ardent for having U.S. military guarantees for any sort of treaty with Russia. They want all sorts of guarantees. They want assurances. They want everything, but like they don't really have the ability to do it whatsoever. And it's interesting to look at, especially compared to some of our other European countries. But I'm curious for y'all who looked at Germany, what did you see or what stood out to you the most that was kind of like, what are these people doing? What are they up to?
Logan, well, even as just an overall kind of observation on this, I think it's interesting. And I wonder how many places removed from Europe, say like a Saudi Arabia, where they're living under a sultan, where they're looking at the way liberal democracies are tying themselves into these economic geopolitical pretzels. And to your point, every 4 years or 6 year, whatever your election cycle is, you completely contradict all of the work you did the previous 4 years to a great extent. It's a really good argument for like a cohesive long-term government in a lot of ways, because you're like, look, you guys have started we call them world wars. I guess the first World War, maybe you could less blame on liberal democracies, but it's like, if you're going to run a liberal democracy system, you really got to be focused on that classical liberal side, because once you've built up this gigantic infrastructure of a government in the middle that's pointing where all these things go, well, now you have all the problems of a large, strong governmental system, but you also have it not being able to put any long-term plan into effect, and it just continuously trips over its own shoelaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that I noticed when I was looking into Germany, is so much of it's tied up in its history, right? For the longest time, let's step back for just a second, right? The original concept of NATO was designed to do three things: keep the Russians out, keep the Germans down, and keep the United States in. That was the original concept of it. And it wasn't until like the mid 1950s that we really started to build back up the West and get its reconstruct its factories, its economy, or not its economy, but its production capabilities. And because of the history of Germany, right? Occupation, country divided until the fall of the Berlin Wall. It really has leaned heavily on external forces for its own defense. It's just kind of built into the zeitgeist of that country, and I think it would be remiss of us not to factor that in, is because so much of like recent German history has always had external security guarantees. Whether you're in East, you had it from the Soviet Union, or if you were in the West, you had it from the United States, and to a lesser extent, the UK and France. And after the unification of Germany, the United States still spent how many millions of dollars housing troops in Germany. So Germany's never not had a significant American military presence there. And I can understand, though I mean, shame on them. Now you're caught, the consequences of your actions. I can understand why they kind of just assumed, well, we don't need to spend on this. America's here. And America's always been here, and unless something radical happens, America is going to be here in the future. Now, enter the present.
One ever shakeup of that, which was Donald Trump, which I'm stepping on you to go exactly
no,
where you're going.
But it's in through present.
Joe Biden election, you have to think, oh, thank God we sidestepped this new direction America was going in, and we're going back to the classical liberal thinkings of
absolutely
America of the last century.
And because of and how Germany has dealt with its war guilt, I think also has a deep psychological impact on its population, even though that nobody alive today is responsible for all of those things, right? But collectively, Germany still carries some of that guilt of what they did. And there's
which is crazy because most of them are in Argentina anyway.
for sure. They bounced out. They either ended up dead in the bunker or they bounced.
Or in NASA, one or the other.
Well, that too. Hey, look, we have a long history of using Nazis for our space travel. All right, nothing new with Elon. All right, they're
a little unsavory, but their rockets are pretty solid.
It's just what we do as Americans. All right, we use Nazi brains for our space program.
If we didn't have so much money and lobbying within the automobile industry, we'd have looked into their trains as well.
Well, there's I'm sure there's a Holocaust joke in there somewhere. But there's this like era of pacifism that has permeated into the German psyche that I also think that we as Americans just don't fully appreciate. And because of that, the political will in Germany, and like you said, they're the bipolar artistic chick in college. They're hot one day, cold the next. Yes, no, yes, why don't you kiss me? No, slaps you. It's one of those things. And especially with the new election, I'm so curious to see what popular support, if any, what do they have? They have a chancellor in Germany. What the chancellor of Germany is going to have, because they're in a
They do
real
not have
predicament.
Führer anymore. I'm pretty sure that
No, no, it's not fear. It's a
Stop
chancellor.
using that one.
And so I'm really curious though to see how they're going to be able to rally their population. And first and foremost, like will they even be able to gather popular support to do a constitutional debt break, to increase their budget, to start debt spending on military procurement and rearming? Or are the people just going to be like, we don't care, no, we're not interested? And so yeah, I'll turn it over to someone else.
That's a very interesting perspective. And Logan, if you did want to go, I can step aside
No,
for a
please
second.
go ahead.
Okay. I honestly always forget the context of Germany. Like they weren't even a whole country, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. They've only just reunified in a lot of ways. And, thinking about it, I think there's like 40 different US military installations in Germany. I think somewhere near 100,000 US personnel are spread around these bases. From that context, it kind of makes sense that Germans wouldn't have this concept or this idea that they need to be a martial people in any sense of the way, especially as you stated with the guilt.
Right. Even a sentiment of should they be allowed to be a martial people might be in their heads a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, the idea of asking for permission is something that we don't think about as Americans, and that probably a lot of other countries don't think about either when it comes to their armed forces. And I imagine that's something that's probably prevalent within German population, within the German political system. It's just like, who do we ask for permission from? And it's very weird to say out loud about like a fairly large country, strong country, significant economy. The people in Germany are fairly smart, fairly capable, industrious. If anything, they should not be asking for permission. And maybe it is kind of on us as Americans to kind of give them permission, maybe to step in and say like, hey, we'll let y'all control a base. You can control one of the military bases in your own country.
That was one of my favorite memes coming into it was like the Germany, like, all right, let me get this straight. You guys want me to arm up again and march into Russia? I'm just making sure because we
march through Poland to go fight the Russians in Ukraine. Last time you guys got really upset about that.
You guys really took excess to that. And I don't know exactly the full feeling of every, or the temperature of the water in Europe towards the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the desire to go to war. And I'm sure that also, much in the same way, how many Americans are in favor of free healthcare? Huge number. How many of Americans are in favor of taxpayer funded healthcare? That number comes way down. I'm sure there's a lot of support right now because they're watching America bulk. And if you're at all educated in it, you can, like I was kind of going through the points of Provoked, the God damn it, I'm drawing a blank on his name now. Great writer. Anyway, it'll come to me later.
German writer?
But just going through all sorry?
A German writer?
No, American guy.
Okay.
He's always on Dave Smith's podcast. He was just on there. Anyway, Scott Horton is the guy's name. Provoked, great book, kind of just going through all of the things we've done to the Ukraine area and messing around with their politics and poking our noses in it and messing around. I mean, if you're educated in the long history of America pushing Ukraine into this situation and now pulling all the chips off the table, if you're sympathetic to that and you don't understand kind of the overturn of American politics, now you're reading things about us looking at mineral deals and which I've heard a little bit of kind of a blown out of proportion. And that's probably more about grain rights, which we've already done a great job of monopolizing with our American nightmare corporations that the Monsantos and the DuPonts and all that. But ultimately, like, if you know all of these facts and you've seen the way we've forced them to push their chips into the middle of the table, and then we pulled out our funding here at the last second, you might feel very strongly that you should go get involved in that until you see what that means for your own country's spending and your own country's inflationary tendencies and ability to provide a decent living for you and your family.
Absolutely. And I think that goes to one of the things that I don't know if like victory lap is the wrong word for it, but something that I am enjoying right now is watching Europe collectively shit itself while they lectured us about universal health care. It's like, oh, you Americans, you're so backwards. It's like, yeah, well, the only reason you guys get to spend, and I looked it up, it's like on average, like the EU as a whole spent 7.7% of its GDP on healthcare versus 1.4% on defense. And it's like the only reason that you guys get to spend 7.7% of your GDP on healthcare is because you have subsidized security guarantees by the United States. And I really enjoy watching them shit their pants, knowing that, oh, you're going to have to start making those same choices that America makes. And it's going to be like, do you want a carrier group that can glass a country in an afternoon, or do you want to make sure that doctor visits are cheap? It's like,
even the parts of our spending that aren't military spending are military spending, or asset acquisition spending, or intelligence gathering spending. Like our entire economy is feeding this thing.
Absolutely. And I have enjoyed watching them shit their pants, knowing that they don't have the same luxury, right? Because the world reserve currency is the dollar. So we get to just kind of, I don't know, like no other country could deficit spend like us and be able to kick the can down the road. Now it's going to come home to roost one day, but the euro is not strong enough for them to just do what America does. So they actually will have to make the choice of guns or butter. They can't do the American, well, we rule the world, so we're going to do both, and you can't do anything about it for right now.
Guns and butter, and you guys can have distended stomachs from your starvation.
I mean, they also have the issue of just being linked in that economic sense. Like we don't have another country that's also printing dollars. It's just us. So, when we decide to deficit spend, we're not impacting a coalition. Whereas,
Sure.
Germany, they've got their bonds. Spain has their bonds. Italy has their bonds. And say what?
I say, well, yeah, what are we going to do? Make the peso worth a full penny?
I mean, kind of. We're getting there, actually. But it is like a totally different thing to do. And obviously, you go back to like 2010, 2011, 2012. There were a few bad apples in the Eurozone who were like, we'll deficit spend. Germany is going to run a surplus, so we can print more money. It'll be fine. And it's an interesting position for Germany to be in because they've been so hesitant to ever run a deficit while they're kind of being dragged down by a number of other countries in the zone. If they had their own currency, their own franc, they would probably have like significant excess reserves where they could just, spin up some spending and get to it. But, now suddenly it's like a much different consideration. And in a lot of ways, like I think the euro might end up going the way of the dodo if this kind of conflict ends up being more long-term and countries end up having to make their own decisions about how they want to spend. Because, Spain is never going to really join in to anything like this. Portugal, Greece, they're not really going to be part of this. And, eventually you get to start asking the question, like, why are we propping up Spanish 10-year bonds? They're going to deficit spend anyway, and we actually need that deficit. And it could be interesting to see where things go. And, speaking from Germany's like psychological perspective of being like this beaten dog who's kind of been held down by NATO, it does kind of make sense that like a lot of their capacities for warfare are just so abysmal right now. It might be they did this themselves on purpose. If they only have 2 weeks worth of munitions, well, look at us. We're harmless. We can't invade anyone. I'm a silly little rabbit, yeah. They have 170 tanks. Half of them are operational at a time. Not silly little rabbits, yeah. 130 fighters, half of them operational. No nuclear arms to speak of. Frigates, subs, they don't have any like airlift or sea lift capacity, so they really can't force project outside of like a very limited manner, which is dependent on being part of a coalition. Everything they've kind of set up is maybe set up for this kind of psychological box they have put themselves in. And it would be very interesting to see how this works. And, politically speaking, I think AFD is probably
beta cuttlefish strategy where they're trying to like appear feminine and weak so that the
beta cuttlefish
doesn't worry about them.
That's definitely got to be the guy, man.
Yeah, just try to scoot under as a female so that the big dogs don't notice you. We are not a threat anymore. We got the message. It took us 2 big wars, but we got the message.
You see that, America? We are learning, yeah. Have some chocolate, yeah.
Now, I thought I saw, as I pulled up that Macron speech there, that Germany is kind of in the same at least the backing of France, that they're positioning right now to up the munitions, the industry, to try to be a part of this effort to go into Russia, or do you see them as a little more hesitant with that?
Yeah, they had a joint deal. I'm sorry, Matt.
Well, no, go ahead.
So they had a joint deal that they've just kind of like worked a framework for. It's possible it might have been signed in the last couple hours. I haven't looked, but they wanted to ramp up their munition ability to make munitions to 2 million a year by 2025. I don't know if that's really possible for Germany, but France's parts of the deal were also about ramping up munitions, ramping up production of fighter jets and things like that. And France's part of the deal seemed a bit more realistic, but there's certainly a chance that Germany could actually really just dive in and go for it. They just need the psychological permission from everybody else to do it. And, I think the concept of permission is
looking around for eye contact right now.
Yeah, 100%. Are you guys on board with this still? It's like, come on, charge, but like looking around. But it feels like the concept of permission is almost going to be what the theme of this entire like podcast is going to be about, because it really kind of vibes with all of the other countries that I've looked at. Because I'm sure in a little bit we'll talk about Poland, and Poland is in this permission where they are the aggrieved, they're the victim in this sense. Like from the progressive stack, Poland is at the top of the stack. They're the disabled, paraplegic, Native American, bisexual, transsexual robot of Europe. So, they get to just do whatever they want and aggrieve everybody, and no one can ever say anything to them. And obviously they're not being mean to anybody around them, but I feel like Poland has the most implicit permission from the stance of like social justice, whereas Germany has the least. And it kind of stands out when you look at their stockpiles and what they're up to. But
Absolutely.
Matt, I'll let you answer the question for Germany and France in the deal as well, if you had anything you want to say.
Yeah, I know that the chancellor has spoken support, but I think it's really going to boil down to what does Germany's parliament, and will there be popular support? Because it's one thing to have your figurehead say things in a public setting, kind of when tensions are high and you're trying to galvanize around, rally around the flag. But I am most
rain down bombs from the heavens. We get a little of that treatment ourselves.
I'm most I'm not concerned's not the right word, but I am most interested or curious to see what Germany's political will be for this, because if your chancellor is out there saying like, oh, this is what, like, we will join the coalition of the willing, and you don't have popular support in your parliament and there's no popular mandate to do so, congratulations, you just ousted yourself, and there'll be a new snap election here in the next four months, because you've lost the vote, you've lost the confidence of your governing party. And I think that because of the posturing, it sounds nice, but I'm not convinced that Germany is going to participate. I just don't see them actually diving headfirst in any sort of peacekeeping deal to send German troops into Ukraine. I have a hard time seeing them actually getting the political support to increase their defense spending by whatever they want. Maybe it was 100 billion euros. I can't remember exactly what he said that they should aim for. I just don't see it. I think that Germany is going to run into the same demographic and popular support problems that every European country is going to run into if anything was to pop off. It's one thing to send, a division of peacekeepers. It's a whole nother thing to actually start contemplating the loss of life and economy, especially when you view it through the demographic crisis that almost every Western European nation is in. Drafting is conscription is not the silver bullet that it used to be. And so I just think that overall it's really interesting to see the leaders of Europe say one thing. No, not that I know, but my inclination and reading into it shows me that there is not a lot of real support for this on the ground level.
It reminds me again of that pendulum swing conversation we had, and like, which one's the cart and which one's the horse? Is this like the world is kind of moving right after we had a strong run of kind of the more liberal running of the grander stage, And is the world following suit with America as we see America kind of go its own right-wing direction? We're seeing a lot of, at least a lot of reporting that these right-wing parties are having shots in all these European countries in these upcoming elections. And a lot of it, I guess, will be tied to that too. Like how much of these, again, back to these liberal democracies being able to turn toe directly as soon as they get a new regime in there. Like how many of these countries don't quite make it there, get turned heel, and maybe even the desire to up their own military and defense capabilities remains, but how many of them have any desire to go into another country, specifically on the behest of Ukraine, to fight for essentially a manufactured war by the European nation?
Yeah, I know, it's great questions. I don't know if y'all can see what I'm sharing, but it's just a poll by Gallup from 2015. Would you fight for your country? They
Oh,
asked a
look at
bunch of
that
European
abysmal
countries.
18.
Yeah, Germany was at 18%. But again, this is 2015. It's been 10 years. Germany was the second lowest on the continent. The only thing lower was the Netherlands at 15. But you can see most of Western Europe is down here in the 20s, 21, 27 for the UK. And it's really only the Eastern Europe, other than like Bulgaria, that's in 70s, 60s. Russia's 59%. Finland, when they say fight for your country, it's always totally defensive. But three-fourths of them are willing to do so. And, the demographic question is very interesting because, as you said, conscription is not a silver bullet anymore whatsoever, especially when the average age in your country is like 45, 44. You don't have a strong conscription base. And it's a very interesting problem that kind of rears up, especially if you have been using replacement migration as a way of kind of patching over a population hole, which is something that pops up in the UK. It's really shocking. Like, I mean, Germany seems bleak, but the UK has it's Nightmareville over there from like a demographic stance and from a number stance and numerical stance. I can get into it now if y'all are curious, or we can hop to it later on.
Give us the rundown.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll give y'all a rundown about the UK. But here's some interesting stats. So they had to mothball over 10% of their naval fleet in 2024 because they didn't have enough sailors to get on the ships. Complete recruiting crisis across the board. They've lost 10% of their force in the last 10 years. They're struggling to recruit in every single branch. They're down 145,000 personnel. They've got a bunch of tanks and fighters, but about half of them are broken down because they don't have enough engineers within like the Royal Air Force. So their maintenance pipelines are extremely stretched.
It's weird if you're bringing all those Pakistanians. Why aren't you bringing a couple engineers with them?
You'd think some of them would have some experience on all those choppers we left over there in Afghanistan.
What's the point of having India as a colony if you're not going to get the ones that can like work on your helicopters?
Oh, absolutely. It's a shame.
That caste system's bullshit. But if you're hiring an engineer, you might want to look at that upper caste a little bit.
At least they've got some great mango chutney over there. The food, fantastic. But they're also like extremely short on spare parts for their jets, for their artillery, for their ships. Some of the maintenance windows have them waiting like 6, 7, 8 months just to repair a single jet. And also they import about 40% of their food. And of all the countries I looked at, they were the only one that had no public reserves. Some of the other countries, like they had a certain amount of reserves, a couple months. Some of them, like Poland, it's classified how much food they have reserved, but it's estimated like 8 months. And they're also fully self-sufficient. So like it doesn't even really matter unless you're going to start bombing farms. But the UK, no public food reserves. The only estimates are that their supply chain holds about 2 weeks of food. So if they were ever in any sort of like major blockade, naval blockade, or if like there was an issue where things couldn't be shipped across the channel, and all of this is coming in through like just 2 ports. So they have 2 ports that are managing the supply chain for, I think it's like 70% of the UK, the UK's population, with no reserves whatsoever.
2 ports sounds like 2 torpedoes.
A little bit.
You don't have
I mean, Nord Stream got fucked up by just 3 little explosions. From a dive team, supposedly. They said it was just the Ukrainians off of
allegedly. They never proved that America was involved, all right.
But if we believe the official story, I mean, the UK has got to be shaking in their boots that like a couple cruise and power boats could totally shut down. Like it could turn into 28 days later for them, except it would just be 14 days later because they don't even have enough food really to like.
They couldn't
sustain the
even make it
zombies.
for 28.
But it's so shocking too because the UK has one of the most advanced defense industries within Europe. They've got high quality production of ships, aircraft, missiles, and munitions, but it's just all really low supply. So like if the UK really, said they wanted to make a go of it and actually tried and really like redirected personnel, staff, new graduates, they could actually turn things around in like 3 or 4 years if they really focused on it. But the big issue is like demographics. So you've got this replacement migration. You've got like a younger generation that looks with extreme skepticism towards the government, towards any sort of like centralized push authority. They're probably the biggest supporters of the Reform Party. They feel the most disappointed by how Brexit has gone so far, in that it's not been far enough. They want more of it. So if you were to ask young people to say, boost these recruitment numbers so they can actually like crew these ships. And sorry, they mothballed 2 ships last year. They're considering mothballing 2 more right now. So that would be like 30-something% of their fleet. They're down across the board. Are the young people actually going to want to step up when asked? Or are they going to look around and say like, I don't know, why don't you get a migrant to do it? Which might be the actual opinion of them. Because, if you start conscripting in these countries, are the conscriptions really going to be migrants, or is it going to be like the actual native-born UK population? That kind of thing might not go very popularly with them. And from this standpoint, I think things in the UK are like extremely dire, like compared to every other country.
As tense as it is right now, I mean, that's half of the stuff I see coming out of the UK right now is like the way they've completely pillaged our country by bringing in all these foreigners to kind of replace us and destroying our culture here. There is no Britain anymore. I mean, there's these massive protest movements in the streets that are, getting pretty close to the racist line where like people have just gotten so fed up with it that they're not even looking for the strategic targeted message anymore. It's just like, get the fuck out of my country if you don't have ancestry here. Like, I don't want any non-English people here because our country is no longer what it used to be. So yeah, it's like, if you get the letter in the mail to go die for that country and you're already having questions about, is this even my country anymore?
Absolutely.
Good luck.
And I think that when you couple this, because you can't, and this is I'm just going to be a nerd for a second. Historically, Britain has never been able to field a massive army. It's like in World War I, the French didn't, like, nobody expected Britain to mobilize the amount of divisions that France was going to mobilize. Everyone understood that. But what the British brought to the table is that they were very well trained, and that even though they could only, they might be able only put, 5-6 divisions across the channel at the start of World War I, those were extremely well trained and good soldiers. These are veterans of wars in Africa, overseas in India. These are people that have been career military officers. And so even though that numerically Britain has never contributed to any war effort the way that France or the United States has in terms of manpower, what they have always brought historically is very well-trained, disciplined soldiers. I mean, there's even accounts of the Germans running into the British lines for the first time, and they think they ran into machine guns because it's just a bunch of British riflemen, though, with bolt actions that are just so disciplined and so good at rapid firing with their very primitive weapons. They're like, oh my God, there's machine guns over there. And it's just a bunch, it's like, let them have it, boys. At 5, and to lose that edge, right? That is what historically has given Britain's army, right? It's never been an army power. It's been a naval power for the height of its empire. But to lose that kind of crack edge of what divisions you do have, at least they're good. And then now to say that, I mean, this is the same Navy that it's like stop Napoleon, it's a great Navy. It's fantastic Navy. And to now have that reduced to, you don't have enough manpower And this goes into kind of one of those broader questions that we don't have to detour too much, but I just want to, it's looking at what you can put out on paper versus what could you actually put in the field and the quality of that, right? And so to say that it's like, okay, cool, we could conscript enough people to man these ships so we don't have to scuttle them, but okay, cool. So now you just have a bunch of untrained people that don't know anything about sailing, that don't want to be there. That's not that, for all intents and purposes, cool. You have a ship in operation, but as soon as anything happens, you don't have a ship.
How about this too? I mean, when's the last time you remember any UK military conflict that didn't involve the United States as the point man?
I think you have to go back to the Falklands.
Right. Like,
The Falklands.
are these guys going to actually have any kind of real battle experience in moving the chess pieces around on the board when they haven't really done it without U.S. intelligence and backing and guidance throughout the entire way, and the big dick himself right behind you? Like, you got the bouncer also leading the way. So all you have to do is come in and back clean up and run some special missions. Like, numbers on paper don't look good for this argument. And then you're already projecting, like, if all of those numbers are capable and the people guiding them know what they're doing, and you have the right kind of leadership and generals to actually put you in a position to win a war, when, I mean, at this point, you've kind of been a branch of the U.S. military for 2-3 decades.
Yeah, it's very tough and it's very bleak. And it's interesting because there are people within Britain who have like this kind of will and the idea that like, hey, this is wrong, we need to fix it. Their deputy chief of defense, whose name I didn't write down, so I've totally forgotten it. He had like a fairly long speech and like a report that he gave last year about what he would fix if he could fix things. And it's bleak. Some of the conclusions, he said that the UK has the stockpiles and manpower to fight effectively against near peer army for maybe 2 weeks. Or sorry, maybe 2 months at the most. But he said it was likely weeks. He said their internal procurement system is utterly broken. And, when it comes to repairing some of their like high-tech things, submarines out for 7 months. And not because like it takes 7 months to repair, but just because it takes 7 months to get bureaucratic approvals to repair the submarine. This is, I think it's more of a reflection of the kind of peace that Europe has been in. As you said, a lot of things over the last 40 years have mainly been like the US saying, hey, come on to Afghanistan. I think they knocked over a tower or 3. Come on to Iraq. I think they're putting babies in microwaves or something. Whatever excuse we make up for the day, it's enough for the UK to send like, a couple hundred troops over. And that's probably low. I'm sure they sent over like 15,000 troops or something to Iraq, Afghanistan.
They have microwaves over there? Is that a WMD?
See, that's how everyone should have known we were lying. They didn't have microwaves inside of the, what was it? The ICU at the Iraqi hospital?
Where the incubator babies.
I feel like I've been trained at this point every time. If you ever hear a story about the tremendous tragedy of specifically children, targeted children, it's always kind of like, this feels like CIA writing operations here.
100%, man.
This gets you riled up bullshit.
But I think one of the most interesting things that the deputy chief of defense said in his little speech was that like the UK makes like high quality production, which they do. Fighter jets, they make most of the naval ships for a good chunk of Europe. I believe Poland and Germany and Denmark all get ships from the UK. They make submarines, they make 155 millimeter shells, a lot of it, but their output is about 5% of what's needed for a conflict. And that's me being generous. It's probably closer to 2%.
5%, brother.
Yeah, they need to 20x or 50x what they're making if they want to actually be able to sustain a conflict. And that's if nobody else helps them, So if, you get a decent coalition, maybe you only need to like 10x what you're making, which is still a huge leap,
increase.
A huge leap. And like, I don't know if UK has the will to do it. And maybe they're another country that feels they need permission. And I'm not sure who from. Maybe it's us again. Maybe we need to give them permission. And maybe that's part of what this whole stepping back thing is. Because like realistically, Russia compared to all of Europe should be able to handle Russia if we're just being realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be, I'm not going to say like it wouldn't be close, but like it shouldn't be something that we're like genuinely concerned about over here in the Atlantic. They should be able to do it. And it would be interesting if us stepping back was kind of what gives them the permission to like finish the transition, the post World War II transition. Because, you know, if you think about it like holistically over 80 years, they transitioned into vassal states and they never really quite transitioned back into independent countries again.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting to have like an inciting moment that gave them permission to become countries again. In much the same way that like Japan and South Korea, they've been remilitarizing lately over the last 10 years. And a lot of that has happened at like the permissiveness of the US. You know, like we helped them build their first aircraft carrier since World War II in Japan. And I think it hit the water in like 2022 or 2023 or something like that. But it was like a 5-year thing. They've got vertical takeoff jets. So they have a helicopter carrier that does vertical jets. And, you know, it's fun. They're building up they're calling it their defense forces, but they have modified their constitution to allow a standing army again in Japan for the first time in 80 years. And South Korea is also remilitarizing, and they're doing it in ways that I think are admirable from our standpoint, where we can look at them and say like Japan was never a vassal state, even though like we have and we still have like significant troops stationed there, in much the same way that like Germany most certainly was.
Yeah, like every fifth Marine I know got stationed in Japan.
Okinawa. God, Americans are so horrible. There's like a rape issue in Japan, and it's only in Okinawa.
That's so uncool.
It is. It's super.
That's so uncool. Shame on us. And shame on the military for not getting
positive that this isn't Japanese propaganda and all those women are raping our poor soldiers?
Yeah, our poor defenseless soldiers. It's got to be it.
It was 64 Marines from Kentucky.
Yeah, absolutely. The language barrier is what's really getting us.
I didn't know she was screaming no.
I feel like regardless if you don't speak the language, the tone of the scream will tell you everything that you need to know.
I don't know. I might need to read some like Japanese porno books to like get an idea.
All right, we're not going down this rabbit hole. We're not talking about. We're not going back to the smut on the bus.
Well, did you have anything else you want to talk about? Because
yeah, I guess I'll carry it on.
I mean, we can change to another country if you want, or we can keep talking about it.
Well, it's just like overall, something that was really interesting that I've caught when I was doing my little dive in Germany is the way that they talked about America, and they said it's like now it's shifting to that we won't be counted allies, but they were also talking about scenarios in which we were openly their enemy. And I thought that was really interesting because the way that I've looked at this, and I think that it's like, I wish that Europe could take a step back and look at it from our perspective, just like we try to understand their perspective. It would be really nice for Europe to understand our perspective. Look, like we're $36 trillion in debt. We can't help. We can't send aid to North Carolina and Hawaii.
You guys have been talking shit about us not having universal health care. We're trying to make things better here, guys.
Absolutely. And
I'm trying to get like you, big dog.
And so I wish that Europeans would give us kind of that same, I don't know, vein of understanding that we're trying to give them, at least in this conversation. Because if you look at it from America's perspective, we've just been hemorrhaging money out for everybody else. And it seems like when Americans need it, there's no political will for it. There's no money to be had. But Ukraine needs another couple $1 billion. Perfect. Israel needs another $10 billion. Perfect. And no one ever flinches. But if you want to try to like increase FEMA funding to help people in North Carolina, whoa, that's not in the budget. And so it's first, I am so stoked about just this shift. And it's not to say that, and I bring that up because nowhere in this do I feel like American foreign policy is trying to make an enemy out of Europe. We're just saying carry your own fucking weight, right? It's like we've been carrying the backpack. It's like I don't have kids, but I imagine like if you're camping and you're hiking and you've been carrying all of your kids' supplies in your backpack, and now they're older and now they're like too old for you to carry all of the gear in your bag. And you turn around to your kids and it's like, all right, you know what? You're like 12 years old. You can carry your own sleeping bag, your own water, and
Yeah,
they
as
just
soon
throw a
as
fit. It's
you're
like, oh my God, dad hates me now.
as soon as your search history comes up red, you got to start carrying your own tent out there. Once we pop you on some adult sites,
And it's,
I guess to give the
Go ahead.
counter to that, the devil's advocate for the other side, wouldn't it be something like, I mean, for one, don't you feel some obligation as the American public to stand up for specifically Ukraine now, after you've kind of pushed them over and over all the way back to 2004 and the Orange Revolution? You've pushed them towards this inevitability, and the actions of the UN as well, threatening to move closer and closer to Russia, and that this is a situation that you have created as a nation, and now that you're backing out. And also in congruence with that, you've built this house of cards that we're all kind of playing along with when it comes to your American oil dollar and your economy, and that there is a legitimate threat of your entire economy collapsing if the world simultaneously decided to stop playing this game. And part of the reason the world plays that game is because you have troops in every single country around the world.
So I want to disagree with that, and I'm going to start by asking y'all a question. There are two countries. Have you ever heard of these countries? One is called South Ossetia. The other one is called Abkhazia.
I didn't play Elden Scrolls myself now.
All right, Matt, do you understand the context of why I'm asking this then?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, the Russo-Georgian War.
Yeah, they're kind of these weird territories
Mhm.
that have been absorbed or fought over for secession movements or to be brought in the fold of Russia.
So yeah, right now they're actually independent. So back in like 2008, 2009, we were kind of cozying up with Georgia, and they had these two autonomous zones within them. One is full of Ossetians, one is full of Abkhazians. These are random Caucasian ethnic groups. And when I say Caucasians, I mean like Caucasus.
Think Bulldogs and Yellow Jackets, Georgia and Georgia.
Yeah, absolutely. And Georgia genuinely was cozied up with George Bush at the time and McCain, and believed that they could actually like invade and that the U.S. would back them up as they tried to reintegrate these two autonomous zones within their border. At the time, these places were not recognized by any country in the world. They were essentially autonomous zones part of Georgia. So all Georgia was doing was invading its own territory to reestablish like government control of this area. And they believed the U.S. would back them. And the U.S. was basically like, whatever, it's your own thing. And then Russia came in, and Russia invaded and defended these autonomous zones inside of Georgia. And the Georgian president at the time basically went in exile to Ukraine, which is funny enough. And he was actually part of the Maidan Revolution in 2014. And it's very quite likely that the US CIA was involved in like Georgia believing that it could actually like retake these autonomous zones and kind of like push into Russia's sphere of influence. But at the time, the US said like, look, we're not going to deal with this. This is like an ethnic issue within Georgia in Russian sphere of influence. And so Russia comes in, protects these two autonomous zones, and these two autonomous zones are then declared countries. They're only recognized by 5 other countries in the world. Russia is, of course, one of them. But it was a very interesting like state of affairs because it didn't involve any U.S. troops whatsoever, didn't involve any U.S. dollars whatsoever. Bush and McCain had the idea that the U.S. didn't really have the resources to spend over there, and we didn't. We 100% didn't. And you know, it's another port on the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea. I don't remember which one it is. And nobody remembers it. No one sits back and thinks to themselves like, oh man, we should have helped. And a good chunk of the Georgians who lived in Abkhazia were genocided afterwards. And this happened 15 years ago, no, 17, 18 years ago, somewhere around there. And nobody thinks about it. It has no impact on, you know, global politics whatsoever. There's a bunch of Georgians who are mad at the US, but, you know, it's a small country that's kind of far-flung from our interests. And I'm not to say that, like, you know, oh, good, we let them get genocided and whatsoever, but I'm just saying, like, nobody cares. And we could have done nothing here and nobody would have cared. We would have moved on to whatever our own concerns are right now. We'd still probably still be concerned about the debt, but we've turned it into something that we all care about, through our own actions. And contextually, I think it's very important for us to remember that like this is only a big deal because we've made it a big deal. It doesn't have to be. We have a 24-hour news cycle at any given moment. We could fold into ourselves and pay attention to whatever Britney Spears is doing now, playing with knives.
DK Metcalf's going to get traded this week, guys. There's bigger things happening.
There was a whole economic collapse that happened in the real estate markets during the Georgia-Russian war, and that fully dominated our headlines. And I think for people now, like we're so engaged with Ukraine, the idea of like forgetting about it is anathema. It's unthinkable. But I would say there's 10 million conflicts around the world that we forget about all the time.
Every day.
And I hope that's more than, and it's a good place to start, being upset with the absurd spending that we do. And hopefully that is the segue into people understanding the like real evils and the depths we go to manipulating the world around us, and to turning over even some other liberal democracies that have elections and seemingly have this whole idea that we like to use as our reason to invade a lot. If they happen to have the misfortune of electing the wrong leader, we're happy to go in there and overturn that in any way we can or see need to. It really made me think of that Kissinger quote of it's dangerous to be America's friend, but it can be deadly to be America's ally. That we do this a lot to these people where, Ukraine's almost the same story. We gave them all these flowery promises behind doors, not on paper, about how we got your back, dude. All you got to do is tote this line for a little while, take a couple losses. We'll get the public to decide that, yes, we do need to defend Ukraine, and we'll come in with the troops and clean Russia out. And then when the public domain doesn't jump behind it, all of a sudden it's like, you have a new election, got a new president, he's not so down, and all of a sudden you're left high and dry. And if you're in a position like the Zelensky, part of this like unfathomable, how did he put his foot in his mouth so hard in front of Trump on national television and
you should have said please
ruin his support? You're right. So JD, listen to me. Part of that is because he's so far down the rabbit hole at this point, and is even receiving death threats in his own country, that if he moves to a peace deal that's unfavorable to these parties within, that he could receive death on his own side. So it's like we've created this situation, manufactured it, and manipulated it the whole way, and then we drop him right in the middle of it and go like, oh, let's see what you're going to do, buddy. And we might just completely pull out and let the Ruskies take everything they want, like we did there in Georgia. It's not inconceivable that we're just going to make that heel turn and go, sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Good luck.
It is. No, it's a real thing. And as much as I despise Henry Kissinger as like a human being, I think he is absolutely evil. He also
participated in some of these coups and regime changes.
For sure. You're talking about a guy that was central to the Nixon administration that sabotaged a peace deal in Vietnam, so it continued on so that they could broker the exact same deal years later under his administration. It's the same thing. We've seen it time and time again. It's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and these rhymes are very, 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 very similar, and sometimes very repetitive to where you think that it actually might be repeating itself, and that sucks. And I think I can take a moment to say like it sucks, and I feel for Ukrainians that got roped into this. I feel for a generation of dead men, all for essentially American interest and this weird liberal geopolitical chess piece that they became, and they were left out like lambs of the slaughter. And that's what happened, and it sucks, and I feel for them. But to Kiefer's point, there are countless other conflicts that are going on today that get zero news coverage, that Americans couldn't care less about, couldn't even point out the places on a map. I would hard press many Americans to find where the relative front line in Ukraine is, even Ukraine on a map in general, but where the front line may be, I think it would be, and it sucks. It absolutely sucks. And I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but I think that is the problem when you cozy up and you play the game. It's unfortunate. And am I proud that is like the history of my country? No, I'm not. But also, I'm on the winning side right now. I'm not invaded. I'm not being bombed. and it sucks. And maybe you should have studied and thought long and hard about before you accepted all of those American military like concessions that we gave you. I don't know, maybe you should have looked long and hard at that peace deal that was on the table 2 weeks in the conflict before you then said, oh, America's going to back us, and that's great. Like, sure, you had 3 years of assurances.
What if you're a middle-aged Ukrainian man, though, and you're saying, yeah, we didn't really have a whole lot of intention of taking all of this from America until you guys funded a coup in my fucking country and put a
US aid was strong.
Yeah, it sucks. I'm not here to say that it doesn't, but I guess to your point to like, do we have an obligation to continue funding bad projects that undermine the national will and sovereignty of other countries? No, we don't. We don't have an obligation to do so, and it does suck. Like, I don't mean to sound unsympathetic, because I do have sympathy for essentially the Ukrainian people in that country being used as a proxy war to test Russian capabilities and to drain a lot of its resources. That sucks. That really fucking sucks for them. And maybe you should have thought about it. Like, yeah, it's like, maybe you should have looked at American history and know how we treat countries in these proxy wars. And you should have thought about that before you decided to jump in bed with us. We've done it to other countries. Why you thought that you were special, to a certain degree, it's like, that's on you. Is that good of us? Of course not. But
I like this argument of like, of course I cheated on you.
Yep.
I cheated on the other chick with you. Why are you surprised?
That was the BPD girlfriend in college.
No, I'm playing devil's advocate on this a little bit, but I am That's with fair. You on where I come down ultimately, where like, it does not justify continuing down a bad path. Don't continue to make a mistake. I think it's also worth mentioning. I mean, we said that they did it because they hated our freedom. George W. Bush would tell you. But when you ask those Saudis why they flew those planes into the buildings on 9/11, they would tell you it's because of geopolitical manipulation from our government in the Middle East and us overturning their countries and forcing them to play along with this oil dollar. And that's how terrorists are made, are creating this grand amount of ill will. Like, there wasn't not one Georginian who has hated America before that, I'm sure. But I bet there's a couple now that have some pretty strong anti-sentiment towards America. And same thing with the Middle East. I mean, these guys, they didn't have any reason to care what was going on in America. They were happy fighting the Jews that were right next door to them. And then we come in there and start messing with everything. And all of a sudden it's like, man, the evil empire is goading me. And there's only one thing I have. I've got to punch back. Even if it's a pebble next to a rifle, at least it's something.
Georgia is really funny. If you ever want to look at an example of a country that 100% learned their lesson from dealing with the U.S., it's Georgia. They view basically everything that is any way, shape, or form LGBTQ as U.S. CIA troops showing up. They tried to have a gay pride parade, which I'm pretty sure we actually funded in 2021. And it turned into like a gigantic mob in the streets. They were like burning rainbow flags, just completely awful. And it's not even because
this was
they're like
country of Georgia, not state of Georgia, because that kind of works both ways.
Who knows?
Who's the same land anyway?
But if anyone's curious, they should definitely look up the 2021 Georgia country pride parade and just see what happened. And I think a lot of that is just suspicion of U.S. activities and U.S. cultural exports as well, because our cultural exports are one and the same with CIA activities. And the fact that we shut down U.S. aid might be the strongest thing as far as keeping us out of these sorts of like regime change conflicts in the future. Because at the very least, I think this shuts down maybe 50-60% of our ability to affect regime change through these kind of like propaganda coups and whatnot.
Soft power, as they call it.
Just went 6 to midnight listening to you say that. That's done a great 50%. Oh my God. Is it possible that Trump's already done us this big of a favor?
But it is interesting to think about, because there's a bunch of NGOs in a bunch of other European countries that very well might be influenced by their own intelligence agencies. I'd be curious how many British NGOs there are operating globally, or French, or Australian, New Zealand.
It's weird that they all decided
German.
to make everybody gay around the world too.
Oh, dude, it's the easiest cover. We're sending in a bunch of men. Don't worry. You can't send in women to do sex ed unless they're lesbians, but suddenly it's like, oh no, we want to teach you about gay sex. We need a man's touch. That's why all of our male operatives are going over to Afghanistan now. And it would be
throw
funny
a
if
wrench
that is
into
actually
Sharia
the
law
cover.
here.
Yeah, but I don't know. This cultural shift in the cultural zeitgeist would be interesting to see set in other countries. You know, we are talking about these elections. You know, Macron has obviously resigned, and at some point there's going to be an election. Who knows if Le Pen's party might be able to win? I don't even know if she's running in France. But you know, what sorts of impact would she have on French foreign policy, especially in the guise of kind of like these NGOs pushing regime change? I mean, she's very nationalistic, and you know, the party's called the National Front. Germany, obviously, AfD lost this time. And I haven't been paying attention. I don't know if they made their coalition or not. Matt, do you know if they made their?
I actually haven't
No?
checked
Okay.
into that.
Maybe they haven't made it yet. I can see them being kind of gridlocked, so we don't know what their coalition government's going to look like. The UK, maybe Reform will win the next election. I'm not really holding out hope. I kind of feel bad for them, honestly.
It's hard to keep up with foreign politics. That's like the same feel as watching a chick flick for me. I'm just like, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely, man.
So something that's really interesting that I don't think that enough people have been questioning kind of the basis of where a lot of this discussion has been, because like we've heard from Zelensky for years, right? If Ukraine falls, Europe is next. You heard it, and I listened to like the first half of Macron's speech, and he saw this. I don't buy into the idea that Europe is on the chopping block. I really don't. And so much of this conversation and so much of these policy decisions, they're going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars and potentially ruin tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives if politicians make a misstep, is based on the premise that Russia is trying to march its troops all the way to the Atlantic coast. And I don't know why that's not being questioned more, especially, and maybe, okay, well, I guess I'll answer my question. Of course, it's not being questioned in mainstream media because everyone's falling in line. But I reject that premise because everyone says if Ukraine falls, Europe's next. I don't know. I don't know if Europe is next. Like, even if, like, let's say in 2022, when Putin invaded Ukraine, let's say it falls in the first 3 weeks. I don't know. And all of that country is annexed. I don't know if the Baltics are next on the block. I really don't. And I know we've spoken about this in the past, but the Cold War called in it once its foreign policy back. The idea of and like so much of this, right? We've been talking about the historical context. So much of Europe's fear of Russia is based on the Cold War. And I get it, right? In 1951, the Red Army is a formidable force. It has more men than you. It has more tanks, more artillery. It has very seasoned, experienced commanders that know exactly how to use the sledgehammer of the army that the Red Army is. And it's posed like right there on your board. Like you could, it's like there's divisions of Russians right over there. And I feel like Europe has never shaken that concept of how they view Russia, because this isn't the 1950s anymore. The Red Army is not this sledgehammer, complete force. Because there was a U.S. commander that was asked in like the late 1940s, what would the Russians need to advance to the Atlantic? And he shrugs and says boots, because there was literally nothing that Europe could, like, short of dropping nukes on them, which are still limited at the time. There was no conventional ability for the West to challenge the Russian army. But the Red Army's dead. The Red Army's gone. Like, those days of that sledgehammer, like, we are talking about a force that still cannot take over Ukraine. Like, this is need we remember that they are now 3 years into a conflict that has bogged down to World War I type advances, World War I type gains, and this isn't the Red Army. That's all I'm trying to make. And I feel like so much of the history of what Russia's army used to be is influencing this. Because if Russia can't like completely conquer Ukraine in the first 2 months of a war, what makes you think that they're going to be able to take on Europe collectively? Like, oh, you think they're just going to roll into the Baltics, and before you know, there's a giant pincer movement in Poland, and oh my God, we just lost 400,000 men, and all of a sudden they're in Berlin, and now they're in Paris, and we're signing these weird peace accords because the Russian bear has just ate us all. I don't know. I just reject that idea that Europe is next. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, it seems really unlikely from a perspective of like what's going to happen. And maybe this kind of ties into the idea of permission again, because like obviously there's a media narrative that this is going to happen, and the media narrative is just to get support for us to send more money to Ukraine. Because I'm sure Raytheon bought all those ads on CNN because they wanted to advertise their fighter jets to 65-year-olds, or maybe it's just they're trying to buy coverage. And I suspect that's it. And there's a lot of like consensus manufacturing. But it is still interesting because if we look at what Europe does when they kind of think things are cool, Germany is buying 60% of their energy resources from Russia. They were buying at one point 50% of their fertilizer was coming from Russia. It's down to 10% right now, which is still wild because that's like the third largest supplier of German fertilizer is Russia. But, they were moving towards Russia in some sense, but they never quite got permission to actually fully engage in like their own separate diplomacy with Russia. They never really quite got permission to engage in their own separate like trade agreements with Russia. And, you look at a country like Turkey, they're one of the BRICS. They're not BRICS like internal. There's a secondary group of nations that aren't quite BRICS, but they're BRICS adjacent. Turkey's one of them. Turkey deals with Russia in a number of ways, even though they're part of the EU. And I know they're part of the UN. I actually have no idea if they're part of NATO. Wait, they are part of NATO.
Turkey is part of NATO.
But they act like they aren't sometimes. And
Yes.
It's very interesting because they seem to be the one country in Europe that isn't really looking for permission to have their own separate agreements and their own separate deals. And it's very interesting to see the difference between them and Europe. And I wonder what gives Turkey kind of the feeling that they have permission to kind of just act completely independently of the US. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like that's the way things should be, in all honesty. And I wonder what they have that Europe doesn't that makes them feel much more comfortable to kind of just subvert NATO whenever it's convenient for them.
That's an interesting
Maybe
question.
it's
Go
just
ahead,
a
Logan.
dependence after having your entire continent bombed over during the World War, I mean, the rest of it's kind of that dependency argument you talked about earlier. They all essentially became vassal states to the U.S. after World War II and just kind of never recovered from that. Maybe Turkey's just outside of that sphere of influence where they're like, what are you guys letting America tell you to do? Like, holy shit, get some balls, guys.
No, that's fair. I mean, I remember Turkey didn't even let us use their airspace when we were like bombing Iraq during the whole Iraq invasion, which is kind of like an interesting thing for a NATO country to do. Obviously, we made up the reason why we invaded Iraq, as far as I can tell. But still, if you're going to accept the premise of NATO and what it is, you'd think they would accept that as like defending a Article 5 country. But at almost every step, it seems to be whatever is in Turkey's best interest is what they do. And like, it would kind of suck if France was like that. But at the same time, I think it'd be kind of cool if they were much more like that. And we had kind of a semi-autonomous continent over there that was capable of their own defense, had their own interests, that was maybe pushing for their own people, even though like Erdogan's fucking retarded. It's better than fucking Europe right now, honestly, which is sad to say.
No, that makes sense. And my understanding of Turkey is just that they are allies of opportunity. They didn't want to be absorbed into the Soviet bloc, right? Like I want to be Poland, I want to be Czechoslovakia. So I guess I'll be with the West on this one. And because of that, like we stationed, right? Like people forget the whole reason the Cuban Missile
Yeah,
Crisis even starts is because we've got a bunch of nuclear arms in Turkey, and Khrushchev is just like, well, because he's like a drunk and a gambler. He's like, oh, maybe if we can just get some nukes into Cuba for the Americans,
maybe I would be putting some nukes inside of your Turkey, huh, America?
Exactly, which is kind of that is the premise of it, and yeah, it's like, sorry, you gambled and didn't work. But
and hilarious too that even at that time when that happens, this is absolutely the red line. This is a declaration of war by the Russians on America. You cannot allow this to happen. Meanwhile, ignoring that we just did the exact same thing in Turkey.
Absolutely,
like,
and
no big deal when we put nukes next to your country, but how could you even think that this is acceptable?
Yeah. And we're still doing it now. I mean, we've got ICBMs in countries that used to be part of the Soviet bloc, which is wild to think about. You know, we promised like NATO is not going to move 1 inch eastward, and then before you know it, we got nukes in Poland.
That's my favorite part of this whole argument along that is like Ukraine never got that in writing. It's like, yeah, but if me and you shake hands on a deal and I fuck you, you're never going to trust me again, right? Like, that's just how deals work. Like, if we have a verbal agreement, you have to put some weight on that. It can't just be as simple as like, oh, they're retarded for not getting it in writing. We took them. There's going to be no ill will on the back end. They understand they're stupid in the dealings here.
Yeah. Caveat emptor, good diplomacy. Good diplomacy.
And we did a whole episode on this at the start of the war about the Budapest Memorandum, and it was in writing, but where that tricky legalese is we gave security assurances and not guarantees that would be ratified by Congress, right? There's one thing that's like, yeah, we'll assure that your territory is protected, but a guarantee would be ratified by it's like, that's like,
it's not my fault your translator didn't understand the language I was using.
It did. This is some serious blaming the victim stuff that's going on, but I mean, it would be nice though, because even though sometimes Turkey does things, it's like, that's not very NATO of you, bro. It is kind of nice that they have a brain and that they can think of their own self-interest. And if something that is against Turkey's interest, like, they're not going to do something that is against their own interest just because NATO says so. I think that's a much better place, because ultimately, right, if you think about this long term, to have people, right, like, if I was to build a coalition, I want a coalition of independent, capable people, and we can come together because ultimately we have a goal that benefits us all and that we all want to reach. To have a coalition of vassal states, as you said, that's a very accurate term. It kind of defeats the purpose of the coalition, right? It's like, if I'm going to have an alliance, if I'm going to tie myself, for sure, if I'm going to have an alliance that binds me to war in certain circumstances, I want very capable people in that. I don't want to be tied down to essentially people just like, oh, what do we do, America? They just dropped bombs on us. I want people to feel like, you know what, America, you're a little slow on that. So screw you guys. This is what we're doing. And then we can act appropriately and according to our own interests. And so even though Turkey is not the best NATO member, they're also like one of the better NATO members. I'm not going to say the best, because of course we are the best. We are NATO. They're one of the better NATO members just because they actually can think and independently function. And we may not like it, right? I'm not super steeped in Turkish politics, their foreign policy. I'm sure if we did an hour of research, I could find a whole bitch session of things that Turkey does, who they support that I don't like, why they support them I don't like. I'm sure
they murdered the Armenians. That's all they got to do. Just say it.
That was not proven. Okay. And besides, the Ottomans did that. All right. The country of Turkey did not. All right. Turkey is not legally culpable for the genocide. That would be the Ottoman Empire, which was dissolved, sir. So
maybe the Azerbaijani genocide of the Armenians will become what's known as the Armenian genocide. Maybe Turkey gets lucky.
Right, just brush
But-
that one under the rug.
But this is also kind of a good time to like segue to another country because I did want to talk about France. They were like one of the most interesting ones here.
They did
And I
seem
know
like
our-
the big dog.
Like, if I'm going to be honest, like they are the big dog in Europe. And I know we've said Europors can't defend themselves. It's a little title of this video, but you have to give the French some credit. We heard from Macron earlier today. For people who haven't, just get on Twitter, search Macron speech. He gave a little 13-minute speech to the rest of Europe about what he wanted to do, how he wanted to ramp up their production, want to ramp up their capabilities. He spoke about America kind of withdrawing from the scene, and totally fair for him to call it that. I'm not even.
If you
gonna
have
dispute
any
it.
trouble with Macron, you can spell macaroni France and it'll correct it on Twitter for you.
Honestly, what would we do without our AI overlords to remind Americans that not everything is food? Although I believe macarons are still a type of food, or macaroons, whatever.
It's a
Who cares?
macaroon.
Who fucking cares?
Uncultured swine.
I'm sure that's what his like old crypt keeper wife calls him at night. Come to bed, my macaroon. But anyways, their speech today was actually like kind of on point. Obviously, it hinged on a few things. One, it kind of assumed that there's going to be a peace deal and that they'll have time to kind of increase their own defensive capabilities. But from France's perspective, I think it's actually possible. They're kind of like the UK, except they don't have a personnel shortage. They're not mothballing their equipment. They're just kind of a little slow on the get up. They also have a fairly robust like domestic defense industry. They build fighter jets. They build submarines. They build ships. They've got munition plants in there. Like they can supply a modern army.
God,
They're just
can
not
you
doing
imagine
it
the smell on the inside of that submarine?
Oh, good God. I've actually heard that submarines smell very weird on the inside because there's something they use to like filter out the CO2, and you can smell it. And like a submarine is the only place you can ever smell it. But I'd be curious to. Actually, I don't want to be in a submarine. Never fucking mind.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
Never.
But France is still kind of funny. Out of all the countries in Europe, they have 290 nuclear warheads. They've got nuclear subs. They've got nuclear capable bombers as well as nuclear capable attack craft. They've got nuclear missile silos. So, I mean, from the perspective of like defense, they're the only country who could probably sit around and say like, yeah, you can try it. We'll press the button. Which is something that a lot of other countries in Europe lack. Like, as far as I know,
Actually,
Germany
every
and
other
Netherlands-
country except UK.
Yeah, exactly. And the UK doesn't have a lot of nukes either, from what I understand. I couldn't find any information about if they had any like nuclear submarines, nuclear capable submarines, or if all of their nukes are just like we got to fly a bomber overhead and drop it, which would be kind of a shame. That's how they're vibing.
I think they still use trebuchets. If I'm not
Good on them, the war dogs.
Well, you know that, not much has really changed in artillery in the last 100 years. Point
Honestly,
at enemy, shoot. So,
Yeah, they're still using howitzers for the most part. They might be a little bit more modern, but like nothing's really changed there. But France also, unlike the UK, is fairly independent as far as food and energy is concerned. They're famous for having lots of nuclear power everywhere. They overproduce food. They produce 120% of the food they actually need. Their food reserves are also classified, which I find it really interesting. Look at all the countries I looked at. The UK was the only one that didn't have classified information about their food reserves, and they had none. If you're going to have no food, you better classify that shit.
definitely classify that. It's
Yeah.
like, you would know we have
No
all
shit.
the food, okay?
We might have so many beans, you guys have no idea. Our mash and bean supply. I thought earlier when you brought up food reserves, it started making me think about the cheese caves in America and Missouri.
yeah,
You guys
dude.
heard about those?
We were
Like we
balling.
started
Yeah, the
subsidizing
cheese.
the dairy industry and we filled up just an entire cavern of the earth with cheese. I wonder how much that could like account for as far as food reserves at this point.
Honestly, I should have looked up the US's food reserves. I'd be very curious to see exactly what we come up with. I have to imagine there's a fuck ton here, but maybe less than some people might assume.
Well, we got 1.4 billion pounds of cheese in Missouri.
I wonder,
Yeah,
so
I've never tried
might-
to live
might
off
be-
cheese.
Might be hazards for our internal plumbing issues in
Is
America, but
I
at least
don't
we can
know,
survive.
what's the caloric Yeah, like
It's a dairy product, so it's got to
could
be
you just like eat cheese
high
and
in
be
fat,
okay for a
protein.
while?
decent energy. You could probably keep going. You'd be low on some vitamins.
You lose less calories on the way out because of the constant constipation.
Yeah, you get
More
to
time to
retain
absorb
all
it
of
all
that.
for sure.
Time to absorb.
Get very efficient, man. And so I know I was talking about France here as well, but France is also one of the few countries in Europe besides Poland where a majority of their fighter jets and tanks are actually operational. They maintain something like 80 to 85% of their fleet is operational at any given time, which is kind of a shock to see what Germany and the UK were looking like. And when you listen to Macron speak, and his focus is on increasing their production capabilities and their munition capabilities so they can actually maintain conflict for a long time without the U.S. If needed. It's possible that France could become that version of Turkey in Europe that we kind of want. They're already a belligerent people. The national pastime is rioting. They're disagreeable. They won't let you speak to them in their own language if they don't like how you're speaking. Like it's nice. They feel like they have their own like internal like self-image that isn't like a mirror. Germany is like a mirror. They look at America. What do they see? Oh, okay, that's what we are. France, they at least have some sense of who they want to be. And
it is right. Do not tell us how to ruin our own country. We can do this on our own.
I think
we just.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say we just need them to pull out of Africa because that's like their biggest like Achilles heel. They have 200,000 personnel, which is pretty decent for the population. But like a lot of it is in Djibouti, the Sahel, and all of like France's like ex-colonial holdings where they're, they're doing what we're doing. They have the Central African franc and the West African franc, which is a currency that they issue and they're making a little penny off of. And this is I think 17 countries in Africa are dependent on the French treasury for their own currency. Then France was recently kicked out of Cameroon, the Sahel, Chad, and Senegal, and potentially more countries. Oh, the Central African Republic. Totally forgot about them. So as that's happening and France is like, oh, we're no longer welcome here, some of those troops can go home and can go somewhere else. And like France has a fairly elite fighting force. They have a decent bit of experience, even if it is just fighting Russian mercenaries and insurgent groups in Western Africa. It's still something. And it would be nice to see them kind of pick themselves up and just start really pumping out munitions. Because right now it's estimated, again, they have weeks of supply of munitions. This is classified as well, but I would be shocked if they had months, for a large-scale conflict. And who knows, maybe France can actually be the country that leads Europe if Germany doesn't feel like they've gotten permission. At least I'll finish what you were talking about. I was just going to say, at least with Macron's speech today, it looks like he's not asking for permission anymore. But anyways,
that's what's up.
Right. I do wonder with what you said with pulling out of Africa. Now, and I'm not super familiar with their Foreign Legions operation that they do in France, but I know that does bolster their military. And I noticed when I was running through rough numbers earlier that they popped up with like 100,000 paramilitary troops, which in my head I thought was probably that Foreign Legion right there, being that makes up like a third of their military personnel at the moment. I wonder how vital that is, like having recruitment stations in these countries to actively bolstering those military numbers. Now, to be fair, they're still the largest active military in Europe outside of Russia and Ukraine, because Ukraine upped theirs a little bit in the couple recent years for some reason or other. But they're still the largest standing army from what I was able to gather. But a nice, almost a third of that troop seems to be like their Foreign Legion, and I wonder how much of that you miss out on by exiting whatever they're doing, mucking around in Africa right now.
I think.
Well, I'll let you go. Sorry, I've been talking.
Okay, and that's all good. On multiple fronts. One, I think the French Foreign Legion is really good for France's fighting force because of all of the conflicts that it's been in. It is an experienced military class, the NGOs, right? Because that's kind of like the backbone of a military.
We don't have anybody else in the military with steady fighting experience.
Yeah, you need some good NCOs, and if you've been embroiled in conflict for the last 20 years, you get some really good NCOs. And it's also a really good deal for those people, right? Do your service at the end of it. Cool. You're now French. You can leave whatever. And they give you a new identity too. So it's like, leave your old name behind, whoever you want to be now. Congratulations. You're now French, new name, have at it. And I think that's why the French Foreign Legion has been so successful in terms of recruiting, being able to maintain its numbers. And two, I think that we're underselling France. And as we, it's like, cool. You had one bad showing in a war that almost everybody else had a horrific showing into. But we forget that France, like, literally conquered the entire continent of Europe. Like, this is a country that, like, in the midst of revolution was able to repel, what was it? It was the 6th coalition that finally did the men at Waterloo. Like, this is a country that has been able to repel and conquer Europe. And for the most part, like, France has a terrific land army. It has a decorated standing army. Like World War One, they did such good. And it's like, oh, cool. So what? You got rolled by Germany. Everyone did. Like, literally everybody that had a land border with Germany from 1937 to 1942 got rolled. Everybody did. And now all of a sudden the French are a bunch of faggots and they can't fight. I think that it's very telling that France would be the only capable European land army that might be able to come out of this, because their tradition is strong. And I gotta throw a shout out for them because
you can go back to pre-France. They were fighting Roman legions back when they were Franks still. These are
absolutely,
to your point. This was a large warring power in Europe since we were writing down history in Europe for the most part, and they lost just the most recent one, and we all decided they're a bunch of pussies.
Absolutely, and
waving the white flag.
Everyone else lost too, and nobody wants to give the French credit for the amazing rearguard action that they fight, knowing that those divisions will be captured or killed to let the British evacuate off the continent. Nobody talks about that, right? It's just like, oh, the British are so good at evacuating their own people. No one talks about the rearguard action that the French are putting up to allow them to actually be able to do that. And so I just like, let's give the French a little bit of credit in their military history, because besides that one showing that nobody did well in until the Soviets stopped them at Stalingrad, they have a great tradition of fighting. And because of all of the experience that they have in Africa, I think that they could probably wield a decent military force, and good for them, because they should.
I don't have an answer for this, but I wonder how much it weighs on their psyche to have the white flag meme out there of like, there's so much fodder about what a bunch of pussies you are, and like, oh, what's the French flags? The white flag's the only one they ever wave, and like, I wonder how much of that, I guess, one seeps into the zeitgeist of France anyway, and then how much of that fucks with you to some point where you're like, maybe we should go fuck somebody up and get some respect back on our name out here.
I suspect that meme is probably why they view us as kind of like uncultured, uneducated swine, because it's like, they've got like 1,000 years of history, and we're just like, oh, I saw Saving Private Ryan. I know what you guys did. We won't even read a book.
No, you guys lost in 40 days. Which, I mean, to be fair, which was a lot better than, what was it? It was the Danish. The Danish lasted 5 hours before.
Yeah, they're like, we're Nazis now.
It's at least they put up a fight,
No, absolutely.
What is 5 hours? Good Lord.
There could have been someone who slept through the entire conflict on accident.
Yeah.
It's like, holy shit, we're at war? No, we actually already surrendered. Oh, okay. I guess we're German now.
Whew, that was a close one.
But it is also, for a second. It's interesting looking at this as well, because like the way these countries have like structured almost everything they do, and the only two that I looked at who like looked like they've structured for war is just France and Germany. France is like super distributed with their food production, super distributed port-wise, lots of heavy lift ports. They're one of the few countries that had like a decent ability to do airlift and sea lift of troops overseas. Everybody else is just kind of like not serious about this, except for Poland. Like Germany didn't even build an LNG terminal until 2023, and it's like a temporary one. They had to like fight through bureaucracy to get it up. Otherwise, they were just like, we are beholden to the Russians. Yeah. And France has had several up for, it's got to be 11 years by now. Poland has also had one up for like 10 years as well. So like, as soon as like Russia invaded, Poland just waited out their contract and then basically like flipped a switch and switched directly to LNG imports. And it's very weird looking at these other countries. England, they're like, oh, we have 2 ports for the majority of our food. That's it. Germany is just like, oh, we've got pipelines. Norway bailed us out with a pipeline. Denmark bailed us out with a pipeline. Otherwise, we were just going to sit here and import them. We don't have food really set aside. But prop to Germany, they do grow more food than they eat. So, I mean, there's a chance that they could sustain themselves forever. But looking at the difference between these two countries,
Russia turns the gas off.
Yeah, or the fertilizer off. But I saw a very interesting quote about
good luck hitting 120% when you can't fertilize your plants.
Yeah, but the quote about France's ability to withstand like external siege was that the French could likely feed themselves domestically indefinitely, but they'll run out of coffee in about 3 months, which is kind of interesting to imagine. Like a sad Frenchman, they've got baguettes, they've got cheese, but no coffee. The cafes would be empty. Sullen silence, but it's still interesting imagining France running a wartime economy because they could do it.
And that might be the catalyst to lead you to that like rhythm of history for the next Napoleon right there. Like no coffee in France. My cigarettes do not have the same kick.
The French,
all of a sudden Italy's folded up under, and then Austria, and before you know it, it's like, holy shit, like Macron's army is like knocking on the gates of Moscow. Like, how did this, like, what happened?
It would be wild. Imagine supercharging an army because they ran out of coffee. And I could genuinely see the French do that. It's kind of funny speaking about the French in this way, like congratulatory, because I'm an American. I make all sorts of jokes about them. But whenever I have taken a serious look at Europe, France has always been one of the better countries in a very interesting way. And, when we speak about the concept of permission as well, France, because of their history, feels like one of those countries where, they kind of have permission to be a little trans if they want to. Maybe make some missiles. I'm going to mute for a second.
Yeah, that's
you guys. You don't have to tell us. We were gay before the UN made us gay. Relax out there.
Sorry, my Uber Eats was outside.
Yeah, we heard it. It's all good, man. I think that it's. But on that point, right? France has. And this might be just like beating the dead horse, but I don't think that we give France enough credit for what it has done historically, the importance that it's played in our own country's founding, right? I mean, without some French support, some French ships, maybe America doesn't, maybe the whole revolution takes a completely different turn without some French support. And
most likely.
I think that it is really interesting, and I want to see, and so here's the thing, it's like, I want to see Europe come into its own. Not because I hate Europe, but because they're old enough to carry their own backpack on the hiking trip. You guys can carry your backpack. It's all good. You're old enough. Your legs are strong enough.
You guys are older than us. This is like trying to get your older brother back on his feet out of rehab. Like, get your shit together, man.
Maybe that's actually that's a better analogy. And maybe we've enabled them to a certain degree, right? And I can understand why, as a European, you would just assume that the world order would always be the same. But in terms of how the world moves and the shifts of geopolitics, to have 80 years without great peer conflicts, that's a really good stretch. And that can't last forever. And I think that that's one of those things that the liberal democracy story sold us that isn't true, that the Soviet Union fell, the West won, liberal democracy will go in perpetuity, and that's the end of history. I mean, that's literally what they call the fall of the Soviet Union. There's this weird time period where they call it the end of history because that's what people thought. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. like everything only runs for so long. Everything's got to change. And I, for one, welcome and support our European friends because they're not our enemies. And I hate that they now view us as enemies because we're just like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to subsidize your fucking defense. And I don't want to see an entire generation of Americans die over in Europe for no fucking reason. Now it's like they are still our friends. And I'm happy to see them actually take some initiative and stand on their own and deal with this, because these are conversations they should have been having 25 years ago, but they didn't.
Absolutely. And it is interesting to compare and contrast all of these countries, because I do want to bring up Poland as well. I don't know if y'all looked at it, but we all knew Poland was going to be strong, and it's been kind of shocking to look at it. So Poland has almost as many troops as France, despite Poland having the population of Canada. It's like 30 million people, compared to like France, UK, Germany all have like 170 million, 160 million. They have 200,000 troops, and they're aiming to have 300,000 troops in 10 years, and they're on pace. Like, they're going to get there. And unless any of these other countries like pick up the slack, Poland will have the largest army in Europe, which is a big fucking shock. They also have 5 times as many tanks as France. Mm-hmm. France and the UK had the most tanks, but France has the most operational tanks. Poland, very similar to France, 85% of fleet is operational at any given time. Their only weakness is their Air Force and their Navy, which kind of makes sense. But I'd say their weakness is their Navy.
And their IQ, they're Polacks.
They have the perfect IQ for a fighting force, man.
Not
a backhanded compliment at all. Oh, man.
I do wonder that, because I noticed we went through France, we went through Germany. France seems pretty capable. Germany at least has the possibility to get there in the future. The UK is probably the next big dog on the list, but then you're getting to Poland and Italy, and you're starting talking about the worry of these turnover in the government towards a more right-wing leaning, that's kind of already taken place here. So are these guys, even though they're the next 2 big players that you would expect on this chessboard, if you're playing risk, to be like, all right, these are the guys we have in the coalition against Russia. Do you even have these guys in that coalition?
Poland is not
subject
to Poland is not subject to the limbs of the left, so to speak. It's a very conservative country. It is not.
I almost did ask, how did they get their military so strong without the strength of diversity?
There aren't any trans black women in the Polish army.
I can't believe
hardly an army at all, as far as I'm concerned.
And on the point of Poland, it's good for them. Like you said earlier at the start of this podcast, they are the ultimate victim of Europe, and they have such a long, sad history. And if you really want to be upset about the plight of a nation's people, just do a 400-year dive into Poland's history. It's not pleasant. It's oh, hey, we're here. Oh, here's the Parisian, and there's a little bit of us left, and it's oh, here's another Parisian of a war that we had nothing to do with, and now we're not a country. Oh, hey, we're a country. Oh, here's another Parisian. Oh, hey, we finally have our independence. Here's an invasion.
Damn, the Mongols made it over. We're one of the only European powers that has to deal with the Mongols.
Right.
Where are our heels?
They have such a.
What do you call a Polak with a smile on his face? Drunk.
And good for them, and they should have a strong military, because, and when you say that they have all of those tanks, that makes sense. And I know that this is getting into some really nerdy territory, but geography matters, right? There's all these really interesting books, Prisoners of Geography, The Revenge of Geography, written, I think it's the same person, but Poland is historically the flat open plain between Europe and Asia. And they have the misfortune of being a very accessible, easy to traverse area between 2 continents. And
sucks to be Mongols in there like river water.
It sucks to be Poland. And why they would have so many tanks? Because Poland is great tank territory. That is the area that you are going to, the Battle of Kursk. I know that is in Russia on the border of Ukraine, but all of that, right? It's the Eurasian plain is this very like continuous flat place. It is the same as like it is the same as Amarillo, Texas, all the way to Saskatchewan of Canada. There's nothing changes. It's all flat. There's corn, wheat. It's all the same. It is the exact same in Europe, from
Fat white people.
Poland all the way over to, you know, like a huge part of Russia and all of that stretch. It's all flat. Nothing changes.
Well, kind of like an unfortunate funnel, because there's mountains to the south of
Mhm.
Ukraine and there's swamps to the north. So if you want to go to Europe, you're like, I'll just take the easy way, which is Poland.
Through
Everywhere
Poland.
else, it's like completely
It's
defended by
getting less
geography.
easy these days, it seems.
Yeah, good for them, man.
And good for
1,000
them.
tanks. And it's funny. They have more operational fighter jets than Germany and the UK, just because of downtime and maintenance in Germany and the UK. And their fighter jet fleet is
Embarrassing.
growing as well. So it's quite likely that they're going to have more fighters in Germany and the UK within like a year or so, just outright. The fighters are coming from us because they're buying them from us, which I'm happy that we're selling fighters to Poland, which is funny to say because obviously we're normally very against the military industrial complex, but I think there are some productions and some sales that are necessary, at least for things to go in ways we want, especially when you think about allies that we like or allies that like kind of share culture with us or like don't treat us like fucking uncultured dogs across the ocean. And Poland is definitely one of my more favorite countries over there. They're also kind of suspect to the same weakness that the rest of Europe has, where just munition production is lower than is needed for a frontline fight. I think the estimate's like 600,000 munitions a month, 20,000 a day is what you actually need to fight. Russia has been getting by with like 9,000 a day, which is short for what they want, but it's more than anyone else is doing, which is kind of wild. Because if we ended up into like a genuine, like full near peer conflict where everyone is supplied, it would probably make the firebombing of Dresden look kind of humane in terms of how many explosions.
Really
Is
takes you
that-
back to that like conquest of Europe by Russia argument of like, guys, they're struggling now for the artillery they need in Ukraine.
Mhm.
What do you really expect them to do to overcome the rest of Europe?
Well, I mean, if Europe keeps up production right now, they can do it on struggle mode if they wanted to, but I don't think they really want to. And Poland actually ends up being kind of a big bulwark in terms of if Russia actually wanted to invade Europe. I don't really think it's possible just from Poland alone. Doesn't really make much sense, especially because Poland's NATO. They would have support of at least a dozen NATO countries, maybe more. So, realistic when people talk about like, this goes all the way to the Atlantic, it doesn't. I don't think Putin even has an interest in invading Poland just from looking on the outside, looking at what's not classified.
I mean, look at everything that Putin has invaded to this point. I can't think of one that wasn't a direct reaction to like us overturning a government or an election being a little bit fishy that went the West way. It's always, for the most part, as far as I can see, it's like reactions to the pressure we put on him. Not that saying that it justifies his actions. Or that I'm giving him a pass on this by any means, but he hasn't like made these massive offensive moves to gain territory. He's pretty, you could kind of look at it and say these kind of seem like defensive moves. Yes, he moved offensively, but they were all done after some grand event that made him feel like he was backed into a corner.
Well, it's the same thing as the Cuban Missile Crisis, right?
Mhm.
We were never going to abide with Soviet nukes in Cuba, 90 miles from Florida, a 4-minute flight from launch to Washington, D.C. We were never going to abide by that. And so we took action. And for those that sit there and be like, I stand with Ukraine, I can't believe why this happened. It would be the exact same if Russia was trying to install a very pro-Russian government in Mexico. We wouldn't abide by it. We wouldn't stand with it. We'd be like, yeah, that's fine. Congratulations, you had a coup, and now we're going to invade your country. It's
So
not
we can turn it back to its
unreasonable.
rightful owners, the cartels of Mexico.
It's fair. It's not unreasonable, and I think that so much of this conversation is just viewed through bad geopolitics. It's viewed through a an old lens, an outdated lens, a myopic lens, where Russian domination seeks total world control. And it's like, actually,
Right.
we just don't want a NATO.
There's
We
a-
just don't want Ukraine and NATO. Like, that's really
there's-
all that we want right
Sorry.
today. No,
There's
it's okay.
a reason it always starts right at Russia invaded Ukraine too. You know, it's because there's other. I mean, why not start with Crimea? They invaded Crimea. Well, it's because there's a huge mess that's very obvious at this point that we were involved in that caused them to take that action. So you can't go back that far because it ruins this whole unprovoked message that you have. And I mean, that's essentially the entire argument of the Scott Horton book that I did a terrible job of plugging earlier, which is Provoked by Scott Horton. Go check it out. Wonderful book. But yeah, it's this game of like, we take all of these weird, underhanded economic hitman type actions or funding militaries or terrorist groups. And these are, well, they're not terrorist groups when we fund them. They're revolutionaries, of course.
Freedom fighters.
Fighting for the freedom fighters out there. And we're happy to manipulate this all the way down. And then all of a sudden, some jihadist gets in a plane and flies into the building. And we go, on 9/11, the terrorists came over here because they hated us for our freedom. And we
And our lap dances and our short shorts.
Right. And meanwhile, it's like, I don't know, maybe we should address all the things we did in those countries before they decided to become radical and sacrifice their own lives to try to find a chink in the American armor. You know, why did they decide to commit suicide to try to attack America? It's a pretty desperate place to come from. What causes a person to do that other than oppression? Terrible tyrants.
Absolutely. And
maybe just not enough women.
Well, there's that too. and the promise thereof in the afterlife. But I do think that it's really interesting, right? Because like some of the shows I listen to, if we were to call in and say these things, you would be accused of, oh, this is Russia. Congratulations, you're regurgitating Putin talking points. This is Russian propaganda, and you've eaten the worm of the Russian disinformation campaign. And I think it's so interesting that the conversation is being framed in that way, because you don't have to be a supporter of Putin. I'm not. You don't have to be a supporter of Russia. I'm not. Actually, could go my entire life without going to that country, and you know, there's some things that might be cool to see, but so I didn't get to see Red Square. Boo-hoo for me. You don't have to go full-blown neo-fascist supporter of Russia to come to these conclusions, but yet if you were to say these in certain circles, that's what it's reduced to. Oh, well, of course, Donald Trump, like, if he's not a KGB agent, tell me how his actions would be different if he was a KGB agent. A lot of those conversations are happening right now, when in reality, it's so simple as like Donald Trump is just channeling the fact that Americans are really tired of spending a lot of money that we don't have in other places. And we're tired of the forever wars, and we're tired of subsidizing Europe's defense, why they wag our fingers about us, why we are so uncultured, and why we can't have universal health care. Maybe we're just tired of the status quo. And in the short term, if what we want as Americans that want to reduce our footprint globally align with what the Kremlin wants, does not make us Russian assets.
I also thought talking points is always one of my favorite ones. This feels a lot like the conspiracy theorist thing to me, where it's like a term that if you just look at the definition, it's like that's not a negative connotation, but we've created this negative association with it in our media by just beating it down over and over. And talking points has become one of those. That's a Russian talking point. It's like, yeah, but a talking point can be factual, can be correct. Just because they're saying it in Russian doesn't mean they're not right about this particular one. And now you shouldn't just run with any talking point that comes from a certain source, but it does not invalidate a point just because the bad guy said it. He can have a fucking point that's right, you know?
It does make me wonder what it would be like to be on like the other end of like a CIA propaganda campaign in like another country. So like, let's pretend I'm in the Philippines and like, the CIA is out there telling you like, oh, there's Aswang, a vampire in the bushes, brother. Don't go talk to the farmers. Stay in the city. And I'm just like, no, guys, that's CIA talking point. You guys, we can go outside. Come on. And then you find a body with like the little 2 pricks on the neck, and someone's like, Aswang, Aswang. And like, I'm trying to imagine that fight of just telling people like there aren't any vampires, guys. Come on. It's like we have
I
the
thought
same
you were saying that you were
here.
on the CIA side walking around with a needle, murdering people, and then stabbing 2 holes in their jugular.
That'd be, in some aspect, it'd be kind of fun. But I feel like we do a lot of that here whenever we're having these conversations, because there's a lot of times when like people want to talk to me about politics. I don't want to do it just because I'm kind of beaten down by kind of reminding people that vampires don't exist. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have that conversation. It's tiresome after a while. And being called like Russian bots and whatnot. Like, I mean, Twitter at least has gotten a lot better since Elon bought it, but it used to be awful. You'd say any just normal thing, and it's just like, oh, Russian bot, here comes disinfo agent. When did you create that account? It's got to be brand new. And you can click, that account was from like 2008 before it got banned. But like, you're constantly in a battle against people who believe vampires exist. It's just a slightly different belief that they hold. And sometimes it like begs the question, like, is there any value in showing up to the town hall and reminding people vampires don't exist if everyone is pointing to a fresh body with 2 little needle holes in the neck? Where's your proof? Look what we have here. Like, how do we do it, man? I mean,
it sure does sound something like something a vampire would tell the
yeah. The vampire sympathizer. When's the last time we saw you at a daybreak, boy?
Sounds like a vampire to me. That's no, I'm not a vampire. That's exactly what a vampire would say.
Look, all I'm
this
saying,
8 foot tall magnifying glass cooks you when the sun comes up, then clearly you're a vampire.
Look, if Whataburger weren't vampire sympathizers, why do they serve breakfast at night? Who's that for? Who's that for?
Gotta ask important questions.
Ooh, unlocked my new favorite conspiracy.
That may stop once all the land working crews get deported, though. They may not have the demand anymore.
I went and had Whataburger breakfast for the first time in a long time last week, Wednesday. I was nonplussed. I had no real takeaways from it whatsoever. And it's been a whole decade since the last time I had it. And I just makes me wonder if it is food for vampires, Like, who is really out there at 3 a.m.? Why does the drive-thru need to be open at that point in time? I'm going to segue, and I apologize, but there was a point in time when all Walmarts used to be 24 hours. And I don't know.
I remember
did
that.
you ever,
it's a better
did
America.
You ever go inside of Walmart? Maybe. But did you ever go inside at like 3:30?
I definitely did. There were certain times as a late night runs in like a college type situation when we were trying to get a hold of some ridiculous inflatable pool or something at 3 a.m. after we had been making bad decisions all night long. Definitely a lot of time in my youth, but never spending any money, always just fucking around in Walmart at 3 a.m.
Yeah, that's what everyone did at that point. And if you ever looked around, it's like, this place doesn't need to be open. There is
maybe that's exactly what their thought was they looked at that during COVID and like, we're just hemorrhaging money being open at this time.
Conspicuous consumption, man. They were just like, look, we're going to show those faggots at Target. They close at 11 p.m. I want them to drive by and see us blasting all of our fluorescent lights at 2:30 in the morning for 3.5 employees and 2 dudes cracked out in the fucking toothpaste aisle, man. That's the fucking vibe. And it's interesting seeing all these places that are just open late for no fucking reason whatsoever. Like, whenever I'm doing anything late, I'm just like, I don't need to be here. Like, I should be going to sleep. And maybe like these companies are making me stay awake by like, Whataburger, they don't serve breakfast for an hour and a half. If I say to myself like, oh, I kind of want to have breakfast, but I don't want to wake up in the morning, you're staying up late. It's messing with my circadian rhythm. My whole sleep cycle's off. And I wonder if this is like the FBI's version of like domestic vampires, It's not quite in the Philippines.
All I could think about that whole time was trying to capitalize on that market share. And what popped in my head firstly was like, with any purchase after 2 p.m., of $25 or more, you get one free Lucy Pall Mall cigarette, you know? Like, take one of these back out in the parking lot. Enjoy yourself, sir. I hope that grapefruit goes great with your amphetamines.
Honestly, this is the kind of thing that makes me say we need to defend Ukraine, because they have a cigarette culture. Like, I can imagine, like, you could show up to a cafe in Ukraine and they'd be like, there's one free loose cigarette with your cafe or your coffee. In much the same way, we should have that here. Like, how else are we going to get the youth to stop vaping and start smoking again? It's important.
Yeah, we have to get back to organic, homegrown, non-GMO alternatives to vaping, like cigarettes,
Absolutely. If you get 3 Doritos Locos tacos, you get 1 free cigarette. Just
Dude, that
helps it all come out.
We say this joking, but holy shit, you'd sell a lot of cheeseburgers at 2:30 after the bars close right next to a college. Ooh,
bruh. People would smoke just because.
You could probably, honestly, you could just get rid of the hamburger part of that and just sell cigarettes out of a drive-through next to the bar district, and probably makes pretty good money too.
No, I like the idea of mixing the two together, because sell cigarettes. Some loser's gonna smoke 4 cigarettes, like they're all gone.
Oh, we smoked around the food. You're getting cancer from the food as well. Relax.
Exactly, man. Exactly. I want to see cigarettes come back in like a fun way. That's the only excuse I can see for things being open late. If you're not going to give away like free loose cigarettes, why the fuck is the store even open?
In the parking lot?
Doesn't make any sense.
Who was the dude that was killed because of that? Was that
someone was killed from free loose? That's right.
Was that?
It was
police guy
before George Floyd.
Pretty Floyd.
Was that?
Yeah, Garner. Garner. That was his name.
Sounds right.
Was he also a I can't breathe guy, or was he
trying to sell some Lucy's in front of the club?
I can't remember, man. That's at least 18
I want to say
really important black people killings ago. So I can't remember that far back.
It's too many, man.
There's been so many influential black men that have died at the hands of police brutality since then. I can't be bothered by something that happened in like 2015.
I'm honestly kind of glad that we've stopped caring about those so much anymore. Like,
I was just going to ask this. This is a little bit of the GOAT conversation. There's many a times a lull has come into the NBA where they didn't have a GOAT. Like, George Floyd was pretty awesome, but at some point we got to have our LeBron James of police killings, right? That's going to come along and take away.
Okay, wait. Who is the Michael Jordan of police killings?
I think George Floyd's guy. I mean, the buzz he's got around.
No, I would say
that.
No, I would say that. Who's the guy that Rodney King? Rodney King is the Jordan of police brutality. He didn't die, but that was somebody that that whole thing started. Like, dude, without the Rodney King beatings, dude, we don't get rooftop Koreans. We don't get the.
Did he have an
Rodney King is like the Larry Bird of police killings, because like he didn't die, and I think that's kind of important. Like,
for a long time,
kind of influential, but he didn't get to like the max of who he could have been.
Plus, King didn't have that he didn't have that intermittent period where he left police brutality and got beat up by firefighters for a couple years, like Jordan did with baseball. I don't know what the exact analogy there is.
No, hold on. There's got to be like a Michael Jordan of police shootings. I wish I could think of who it is. I keep thinking about Daniel Shaver, but he was like a white guy, so he's more of like the Jeremy Lin of police shootings, where it's like, highly technical.
He had a fun 3 months in the league. He popped off that one time, but nobody really cared that much.
Oh my god, so bad.
No, it's only bad if we don't have an answer. Then it's bad because we're just joking for no reason.
Well, then let's keep digging. Let's dig our holes, brother.
King is a good candidate, but he does kind of feel like a Magic Bird era. I'm kind of with you on that. He's a guy who like really was there for this up and coming time in the league, but yeah, there's got to be a better. Somebody reached a greater level.
Like Fred Hampton and Malcolm X, and those are like the Wilt Chamberlain, though, right? In this analogy, like they won a lot of titles before we actually considered them titles.
Yeah, I think Malcolm X was shot by the police,
though. And we have the answer. We know who Michael Jordan is. It's the hands up, don't shoot guy. That's the Michael Jordan of police shootings.
That's a good point.
I can't remember his name.
Sold an incredible amount of merch. That's very important.
Wait, who's this guy? Who's the hands up, don't shoot guy? Did he get shot?
Dude. Yeah, I don't know how I don't know his name.
It's like the what are you gonna do? Stab me? It's like, yeah.
So the hands up to Michael Brown. That's his name. That's the Michael
Yeah.
Jordan.
Was that
police
the
shooting.
that was like the young teenage kid that had like an airsoft gun, right?
No. That's a different kid. I don't remember that kid's name.
Damn.
Michael Brown was like the big one where people are just like, we got Ferguson riots.
Who's Michael Brown?
Like they had this thing where his hands were up, is what they said, but then they found out later that he got in a fight with a cop and was trying to take his gun or something, and that's when he got shot. But one of the shots hit him in the back at some point, and so people were like, "You got shot in the back with his hands up." Yeah, and like it was the first one where like social media was just like, "Oh, hey,
And that's
people are watching our ads because they want to see this guy," and so like it really like actually kind of like drove the whole like people caring about black people getting shot by police. So there was like a whole little era, maybe 7 years long, where people were just willing to watch police just shoot people on body cams on their cell phones, and I think people are tired of it now. It's not so exciting anymore.
Yeah, because it's depressing.
Yeah, and like the analysis has gotten like serious enough to the point where it's like, here's the guy stealing the gun, so like there's just not so much of a narrative anymore that it's like
Ferguson.
the
Yeah,
Ferguson riots, dude, that
I
popped off.
vaguely remember that one.
I can see how you forgot, man.
Like I said, dude, I can, it only goes back so far. I can only care about so many brilliantly bright young black men with such promising futures that were cut short before the prime of their life. I only have so many of those in my threshold to care about.
We had 8 years where the CIA was convincing us werewolves were real, and we finally cottoned on to it after a little while. Now we're on vampires, man. Give us a little while.
we've uncovered the truth. I was going to say, if you can't even remember the details of Brown, I guess that means you're more of a LeBron guy then, huh? That should go.
Yeah, it's like 14. I mean, my political worldview was still very limited. At 2014, my worldview was can't vote for Obama because I'm gonna vote for Gary Johnson because Obama bad, drone strikes. That was about the extent of my political worldview.
I understand. Totally understand. I have another question now. It's less serious than the last one. Okay, who is actually the better basketball player? Is it Jordan or is it LeBron?
Ooh, interesting.
I've actually been wavering on this in my personal life as of late.
Why are you conflicted?
I was 100% Jordan guy, and then for a while I was Jordan had the higher peak, greater at his best, more dominant at his best, but LeBron's had the better career, so it's almost two different arguments. And I don't know, LeBron's 40 years old and he's still dropping 40 bombs, and as much as a Jordan fan as I am, the skill set and the changes that LeBron James has gone through his game, the multiple positions he'll play, the multiple ways he's found to win a championship, even if you don't like the way he jumps team to team, it's hard to say he didn't make the right choice every single time and going to find a title. And maybe that cheapens it a little bit for some people that he had to move around to get those titles. But I don't think Scottie Pippen and Rodman were absolute slackers out there. I think Jordan had plenty of help as well. And I don't know, man, this dude's 40 years old and like he could win a title in the next 2 years. It's conceivable. It's a long shot, but it's conceivable. It's pretty damn impressive. And Jordan played in his 40s on the Wizards. He took a gap in the middle. Who knows how good he could have been. But part of this argument on greatest is the resume you build.
Did he even make it to his 40s?
Jordan?
He came back and played for the Wizards in his 40s.
So, but here's the thing. When we talk about the LeBron Jordan debate, we forget about the Wizard years. All right. That doesn't matter. The Wizard years have no bearance whatsoever because all I hear is 6 for 6, defensive player of the year. LeBron can't hack it. We forget that he went how many years? Like 10 years between his freshman national championship at UNC to the first time he won a title. No one remembers all of those years that Jordan didn't even make the playoffs. But LeBron
East
came in and
through
took
LeBron
them to the
time.
For sure. Like LeBron came in and took the Cavs to the playoffs his very first year as 17, 18-year-old. spare me, dude. LeBron's better. And I'm so tired of all of these people living in the past because everything has gotten better, right? Athletes have gotten better, stronger, faster in every perceivable category in every sport except NBA basketball. The 90s were the peak. And everything has progressed so much further, better, faster, except that. And all of these people, these old hacks that say like, oh, well, these young kids couldn't make it. It's like, Charles Barkley, shut up. You didn't win a title. Patrick Ewing, we don't care about you. You couldn't get out of the final. It's like you couldn't make it to the finals. We don't care about your opinion. And I hate all of this old person gatekeeping that is going on about LeBron James. He is by far the best. I would take Kevin Durant in a one-on-one tournament before I took Michael Jordan. I might. Yep. I would. And just like
you might not be wrong. There's
straight
your
up
point,
one-on-one. Dude, I'm taking Kevin Durant before I take Michael Jordan.
Okay, but
some of this is like
players in their peak. You're still taking Durant?
Yep, absolutely, all day, every day.
That's kind of a shock, man, because like Jordan is such a raw competitor, and like obviously he's a product of his time.
And
if he was playing right now, I imagine Jordan would be much better than he was in the 90s, because much the same way that everything's gotten better.
That's
Jordan's too much of a competitor. He would have himself gotten far better as well with like whatever tools were available to him.
Right.
But I also wonder how much that would stack it, right? Because we talk about Jordan being compared. This is the guy that's smoking like 6 cigars and playing 36 rounds of golf, 36 holes of golf on like playoff games. Like,
right. Yeah, Babe Ruth was the best athlete on earth at one point in time. The man was having a porterhouse and a liter of bourbon for breakfast.
Right. It's like, and so I think that the Michael Jordan is great. He will always be great, and can't take away from that. Well, I mean, God, I sucked at basketball, so who am I to say? But since I have
Matt, come on, dude, you still suck at basketball.
Yeah, I probably do, dude. I haven't played shooty hoops in God knows how many years, dude. I haven't shot at basketball in like 2 years at least. So I suck worse than I did in high school, and that's saying something because I wasn't good in high school. Okay. However, spare me the gatekeeping. LeBron James is by far the best. He's a way better athlete. We just conveniently forget all of the bad parts of Jordan's career. All we focus on is the 6 for 6. Everything else gets glossed over. So I'm going LeBron all day.
I think if you put them in a clutch situation, though, my money is on Jordan. Like, if the clutchest situation possible, money's on Jordan. He's just too much of a raw competitor.
So there are stats compiled on this, and they started collecting them in '96.
You brought that up just now.
And so there's some championships and seasons that are not factored in this. This is before Jordan, but LeBron James is the most clutch player in the NBA.
Damn.
Since then, he's way more clutch than Kobe. He's way more clutch than Steph Curry, than Kevin Durant. Like, if you need somebody to get you a basket at the end of the game to tie or go ahead, LeBron James is 41%. The nearest person was in the high 20s.
Damn.
Did you see
that? Okay, that's not even close then.
Did y'all see the chart comparing his regular season and playoff shots over his career?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's like blue dots for the regular season, and they're all over the place. And then red dots in the playoff, there's not like a single mid-range shot. It's threes, and then the entire paint is just red from him dunking the ball in people's faces. Because that's another thing that he doesn't get. And not that Jordan's not a highly intelligent person too, but LeBron is a very high-level IQ person, I suspect. I mean, he has turned his incredible wealth through basketball into tenfold what it was when he started. Like, he's going to be one of those billionaire athlete one day. Like, this man is not, and has dodged every bad step he could along the way towards franchises. Maybe the only counter argument to that being that he's brought in some bad players at times to franchises, force them to trade for guys that weren't that great. But LeBron James is such a maestro of the game that he can play any position. He's so much bigger and stronger and faster than Jordan was. Like, I'm with you. I think I've let go of my old man proclivity and I've just given it to Jordan. I think it's also worth mentioning, like, when Michael dunked from the free throw line, it was like, holy shit. Now guys do windmills from the free throw line.
Yeah, and it was impressive when
and
Joe
it's like when you
Montana
see
did what
it,
he did 40 years ago. But since then,
Right.
how many good
Sometimes-
quarterbacks have we gotten?
I mean, this is
Alright,
orangutans
I'm
learning how to fish with spears, you know? Sometimes you got to see it first to realize, oh, maybe I can do that. Steph Curry started shooting threes 5 feet behind the hoop. Now every time I go to the Y, I got to watch 14-year-old kids airball at 5 feet short from three, you know?
And don't get me wrong, like LeBron or Michael Jordan is probably like number 2 all time. But I think that today there's a Michael Jordan on almost every NBA team in terms of like his skill set, what he can do. There's only one LeBron.
I still feel sacrilege to
Okay.
me, but you're not wrong in the skill set department. The skill of the game is tremendously higher now than it was in the 90s. And if you watch any basketball, you can parse that out pretty quickly.
Thematically, y'all have convinced me.
But no, the 90s were the
Emotionally
height.
and spiritually, I'm not convinced. But
It feels
thematically,
gross to say as an old man. I don't want to say it either.
As an old man,
Dude,
I'm gonna take the Ken goal off.
dude, sometimes you have to just fend for yourself and you have to step up and write your own defense checks. And nobody's happy about, Europe having, no one's happy about Daddy America taking a back seat. I feel it's the same. It's all the same thing. It feels gross, but maybe it's for the better. Like we should move on. We should stop glorifying 90s basketball to what it was. Like it wasn't that great. Don't get me wrong. There's iconic people, but overall it just wasn't.
I would even
great.
say it was great because greatness is a relativity answer. And at the time, Michael Jordan was the greatest. But he wasn't the best to ever play the game by the time LeBron got there. I would even give it that. You can still make a greatest argument for Michael Jordan in the relativeness of the sport. However, if you make that, you got to start bringing up Bill Russell pretty quick.
Yeah, we talk about 6 for 6. No one wants to talk about the 11 or 12 championships.
Yeah, what about 11 for 12?
Yeah, for sure. No, that doesn't matter. No. It's like it doesn't matter all of those years
and
between.
How quickly all your fans of the 90s will point to that and go, yeah, but all those guys were plumbers that he was playing. And it's like, that's kind of what we're saying about the 90s.
That's kind of what we're saying there.
Those guys only made $2 million a year to play. They can't be that good.
Y'all have given me permission to let go of the past and embrace the future, no matter how much I don't like it. Now, if only LeBron would just finish a book or stop pretending to read them, then I think this transition.
That's fair. That's
wonder too.
Totally fair.
This might fix itself pretty soon. If Cooper Flagg, the white boy out of Duke, comes out and actually is like just arguably the best player, he doesn't even have to necessarily be the definitive best player in the league. But you'll see some guys, some old crusty white guys start dropping Jordan to say Cooper Flagg's the best player to ever play for sure. They're already gearing up. They want that white boy to be good so bad.
Well, it's just like Cooper DeJean, right? Like that guy. That guy's like Philly. He's a champion around Philly.
How about Scadaboo coming out right now? You know how many guys are going to draft Scadaboo in the first round of their fantasy draft next year and be so mad that he runs a 4.840?
We all look for the great white hope. However, historically, it just doesn't come. You only get like one Tom Brady every 30 years in all sports. Yeah. It's just
every other year it's Larry Bird and God takes us back away before he can become the greatest.
It's unfortunate, it's the price of cheap cotton. American whites are just
comes out as old Curly. Some say the greatest athlete I'm alive.
Hey,
runs a 6'5", 640.
Fastest man alive, they say.
Fastest man to ever run.
Yeah, it's. I hear you, Logan, and I empathize and I support everybody who wants the great white hope, but it's just not going to happen, dude. America, we've worked way too hard for our blacks to be superior. And it's not this like bullshit France, like, oh, let's just import them from our colonies. Like, dude, we've worked really hard for our blacks to be where they are today. It's not this bullshit. Yeah, absolutely.
We worked really hard. They worked a little bit harder than we did, but we worked really hard.
Well, someone had to work. It's the price of cheap cotton, dude. You don't get Usain Bolt, all right? Just because willy-nilly. You get that because sugar plantations, all right?
Absolutely, man.
And let's stop, like, was all that great? Of course not. However, let's not like diminish what the past has given us. Like it gives us some great athletes. And like if the unfortunate byproduct of those athletes was like, I don't know, 200 years of subjugation and slavery and some forced breeding and separation, well, at least we have good basketball players today. All right.
Medals per population. It's Jamaica and Serbia, man. Or Croatia, sorry. Jamaica and Croatia. Everybody else, are y'all even trying? Come on now.
Yeah, but
interesting one.
Hold up. But that's the same argument when people say that Lithuania spends the same amount of GDP on defense as America does. It's like, okay, cool. That's technically true, but spare me the country that has 300,000 people and a GDP of probably what, Tennessee? And then compare it to the American.
Much less.
Okay. Point made. Like spare me your medals per capita, sir.
Look, I'm just trying to say, whenever there's a track and field event, there are at least 2 Jamaicans in the running every Olympics, and this is a country that's the size of Houston and less population. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
They do.
And all I'm saying is that Lithuania isn't keeping up with its part of NATO, sir. All I'm saying is they're 8,000 troops, even though percentage of their GDP is a significant contribution.
Yeah, we get it. You guys are fast. Where's your soccer team at?
Exactly.
Why have I never seen you field a volleyball team out there?
Right? Belgium, do you guys even have baskets to play basketball? Come on, guys. Less than 1,000 troops, though. That bit had me rolling.
Well, also now, yeah, we can wrap up because historically it's like, yeah, well, yeah,
we want
to get rolled over. It sucks to be that, that flat lowland area between the mountains and the Ardennes forest, and it's like, well, if I'm going to invade France, do I want to punch through the woods or go through this really nice open terrain? Well, I'm sorry, Belgium, you're in the way.
Yeah, that's so sad. European countries will have to redefine what military consent means. And I think we're all going to get to enjoy watching that unfold before us like a flower.
I look forward to the French finally having a conversation about consent.
It is a Pepe Le Pew. But before we hop off, I do want to get y'all's take on one last thing. The White House interaction. What do you guys think about that? With Zelensky, was that was it set up? Did JD bait him? Was this like some cover to try to defund Ukraine because Trump wanted to? Like, what's y'all's thoughts about that whole weird exchange? Because it's very weird.
I'll be quick, but I'm pretty sure it was organic. One thing that's interesting is if you look back at some of the coverage of like Biden's interaction with Zelensky, there were a few times like Biden got angry at Zelensky. A few times he got mad at him. It just wasn't being filmed in the same way. There wasn't the same level of attention to it, but it was reported in much the same way.
Sure.
I suspect that Zelensky is kind of a grating character in many ways. And, obviously
he's an improv comic. They're all grating characters.
Yeah, if we're going to be honest.
To be fair.
And I also suspect that him going into that without a translator and just trying to do it based off his own English skills probably had him coming off in ways that he didn't intend to come off, that kind of like had the whole thing like go off the rails. So I think it was like an organic interaction that happened genuinely. I don't believe Europe set him up to or anything.
There was a point where somebody told him, "You're not holding any of the cards here," and you can see Zelensky get very confused because he has no idea.
We're not playing cards.
What that colloquialism means. He's like, "Oh, cards in my hand. What the fuck?" I think it was a shitstorm of. I mean, I think Zelensky saw the writing on the wall as far as the funding's going away, so he came in a little bit prickly anyway, and I think he decided he wanted to have this big confrontation moment. There was even an interesting moment where. When he's saying like, no, you can't even negotiate peace with Putin until we get these concessions military wise from you guys, where JD Vance kind of said something along the lines of like, you're going to do this now, almost implying like maybe he had an opportunity to do this before the camera was rolling. or maybe we're going to continue these conversations afterward, whatever the case may be. But it was, it just kind of caught as one of those, like, they're mad at him for like, hey man, you were not supposed to do this on stage right here. So I don't know if it was a combination of like the bad translation and Zelensky being in a pissy mood because his gravy boat's getting a temporary cork in the faucet right now. But I'm with you. I don't think I think he planned to come in to have a confrontation to try to sway any kind of influence he could into support of Ukraine. And I don't think that he spoke good enough English to navigate that water like he needed to, and ultimately resulted in a pretty big blunder, I think.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I'm split on it. And
Tell us about the vampires, brother.
that's fair. That's totally fair. And maybe I am looking for vampires. That's totally true. I just don't know how many times historically have vice presidents been a part of this? And this is a question I've asked that I've yet to actually look up to see. But like, how many times was Kamala Harris present during these type of things? Like, how many times when Joe Biden was vice president, like, was he in the Oval Office when Barack Obama was meeting with Putin or any other world leader? Like, I don't know how often vice presidents are part of this. And maybe if I did like a second of research, it might inform my decision on this, but it seems like they're usually not a part of that. And then it makes me wonder, if that is true, why is JD there? If these are just supposed to be, this is the press conference, we're supposed to smile, shake hands, yada yada, get the photo op, then we move on to the real substantial stuff, then it's like, why is JD there? Because I don't know of any other instances where vice presidents are there. However, I haven't looked it up, so I don't know. Maybe there's always a vice president, like literally right out of camera.
There's a vice president in the room with you right now.
You might have gotten like a little bit fooled by recency bias with the Biden regime, because even though he went through all the DEI, like woman of color stuff in picking his VP, the dementia got to him and he started getting spooked by black people again towards the end. So I don't think
this is a man that has historically dropped the N-word, the hard R, in several congressional hearings. And
look, the NBA was different back then.
They
used to let the refs have control of the game, you know?
Back before the inmates got a hold of the asylum, as far as I'm concerned. No, that's totally fair. Yeah, part of me wonders that if it was just like this organic misunderstanding, right language barrier, it's a real bitch. And part of me wonders, I don't know, were they just like waiting for any opportunity to try to poke it, and then you can yank your $1 billion of funding, and then you can point to this as the reason why. Because I think the funding was going to probably get yanked regardless. But after that episode, it goes down better to the American public on why. Or at least the majority that voted you into office. On why you would change funding.
I feel like the funding was legitimately possible there. Contingent on the minerals deal. And it's interesting that was like such a big sticking point for Zelensky, because it's kind of one of those things where it's like you would get U.S. personnel in your country, U.S. infrastructure. Yeah, there's like kind of an implied protection that's going to be like
sure, because if Russia invades or shoots, then they shoot Americans.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird that he was just so prickly against it, because like it gets him what he wants without saying, you know, we're definitely giving you guarantees, and
it gets him what the public perception of what he wants is.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I would say that like public perception of the mineral rights thing could be seen as like a giveaway or us taking advantage of him, even though he would get what
that was
wanted.
My knee-jerk reaction for sure.
Well, don't lose.
Yeah, exactly. Now he's got to don't lose with, you know, the backing of France and a bunch of people who don't have enough munitions, all things being said. But I don't know. We'll see. But my reading on JD being like present in a lot of things, I do think it's also ahistorical. I don't think there's been very many examples ever in my life where a vice president is front and center in like a lot of negotiations. I think Trump is doing this as a way of extending his own his own administration beyond just 4 years.
He's
you know,
setting up that third term.
and it has to be
Not
someone
going
who's
to be him on
outside
the
Neo
ticket,
party.
but you know.
Yeah, and if he just has like a vice president who's not really present, I think it opens the door for the RNC to kind of uniparty him out with
Yeah.
The next
Fair
Bush
enough.
sibling behind Jeb.
It's just,
I forgot his name.
Is it Jeb's turn finally? I think
No.
they got to skip a generation. They got to go to the next one, right?
It is not Jeb's
flubbed
turn,
already.
dude.
There's
They've
another
already
Bush
fumbled.
behind Jeb.
I'm sure there is.
We should
But
probably
is this
wrap
like
it
the
up. I'm
it's like
just
is
curious.
this like the Manning lie where it's like, oh, there's
There's
another Manning
Cooper.
coming up.
Oh, absolutely. There's 100% another one.
There's another Bush coming.
Yeah, this is just good GM work. It's a bridge quarterback until Barron's old enough to run, you know.
Dude. In all seriousness, when people talk about like the death of American democracy, it's like no. We're in the beginning stages of this. Like Donald Trump is not Julius Caesar, but you know who is? Probably Barron. Barron's probably our
Barron.
that generation.
I heard
we're about 30 years out from whatever
I've
the
forgotten-
end game of this is.
The next
remember
Bush
the
sibling
exact
is
business
named
of it.
Neil.
Neil?
Neil Bush.
Dude, you can't elect a Neil. That's worse
You
than Al
could.
Gore.
You could. He's only 70 years old, practically a spring chicken, man.
Neil. No way, dude. I can't resonate with a Neil.
That whole family is
Jib.
kind of wild because, like, on the surface, they all look like fairly successful business people. And you look at their businesses, and it's kind of like weird, random charities. Like his wife just happened to found
Well, when you have
Share.
political connections, charity work is very profitable.
Oh, 100%, 100%. But it's a charity that gives away teddy bears overseas to like disadvantaged children. I'd be curious to
Teddy
see.
bears
Yes.
filled with drugs, funded by the CIA.
We're just sending sulfides to Venezuela. What's the big deal?
Soft power, baby. Don't underestimate it. All right. You guys got anything else?
Not the fuck at all.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you very much for listening to Against the Mob podcast. We appreciate you guys. Thank you, as always, Mr. Flirt Chief, for joining us. We always appreciate and enjoy your company. I know you guys have a lot of options and opportunities to listen to other things. So if you choose to listen to us, thank you very much from the bottom of our heart. We really do appreciate your continued support and your listening ears and eyes. Something serious podcast for serious people and something about mobs and fighting against mobs and people over politics, yada, yada. We'll see you next week.
Nobody cares about